Today marks the 20th anniversary of New Who, hopefully. So I thought there'd be no better way to celebrate the greatest show of all time and all of our favourite coming back 2 decades ago than discussing my favourite story the show has ever told. Despite me being known for mostly criticising Doctor Who, I think it should be known that I'm only so critical of it because I know how truly amazing this show can be at its best. And while I played with the idea of doing a Doctor ranking, a best episodes of New Who, or even a video discussing why I love the show as a whole so much to celebrate the show's milestone, I thought it would be far more interesting to show why my approach for reviewing the show comes from a place of trying to be as objective as possible over just criticising the show because it's not as good as it used to be. Notice the titling of this video, Why the End of Time is my favourite Doctor Who story. Not the best, but my personal favourite. Because as much as this episode is my favourite piece of fiction ever, for many reasons that I'll explore today, it is absolutely not the most objectively well-written story the show has ever put out. Hell, there's multiple I can think of off the top of my head that are much, much better than The End of Time. One of which is literally the episode before this. But despite that, I still love it to pieces. It's easy to enjoy something even if you acknowledge that it has flaws, and I think this story is a perfect example of that. This story is the culmination of 4 series and 3 specials, ending the greatest era of Doctor Who that we're likely ever gonna get. And even though at the time of this being written, I haven't actually reviewed any other stories from the RTD1 era that aren't The End of Time, I'll mention loads throughout this review what makes that era and some episodes in particular so special, and why it all works in favour of this story despite the flaws it has. Speaking of the flaws it has, the few of you who've seen my original reviews on The End of Time might be wondering why I'm doing it again if I've already done it before. And there's a few reasons, but the first of which is that despite my original review being one of the only ones from that era of my second channel to actually hold up pretty well, I neglected to mention a lot of the flaws that the story overall has, which was because I mostly wanted to focus on the positives of the story since it's my favourite, and also at the time, to be honest, I didn't even really notice a lot of them, because of how much I was focusing on analysing the exceptional character drama. So I want this review to be a much more fair assessment of the story, considering I don't think I fully did it justice the first time round. Also, a personal reason for me is that during that time on the channel, I was making all my videos on this crappy little phone. And while I think the videos I made in that time hold up pretty well considering the circumstances they were made under, I'd be lying if I said that watching them now doesn't make me want to just redo them all, because, well, this is probably going to be the first and only time I will ever do a double upload onto YouTube. Yeah, the video and audio quality isn't the best. I don't know how anyone could watch my videos from back then, because I find them a challenge to watch now. And another quick disclaimer I should add before I start reviewing this cinema is that I will be talking about every aspect of this episode that I possibly can to make this review the most objective and detailed as I am able to. So I'll not only be talking about the writing, but the music, the acting, the directing, the cinematography, the themes, and with all of that will naturally come up comparisons to other stories that fail or succeed with similar aspects of each. So if you are purely wanting to see the positives and only the positives, then check the video chapters in the description, because I've, to the best of my ability, laid them out in a way to show off everything that I talk about in each section of the video. So if you're an oversensitive Moffat fan that can't handle the fact that most of his era stinks, don't be surprised if he gets randomly slagged off in this video. This is a Richie Reviews video after all. It's inevitable to happen at some capacity at some point. But with all of that said, let's finish the RTD era by reviewing it for the first time in 5 years, and let me tell you why today, in celebration of New Who, why The End of Time is my favourite Doctor Who story. This story starts off masterfully, with this brilliant shot in space starting from the moon which suddenly rushes down to Earth, accompanied by this brilliant monologue from who we later find out to be Timothy Dalton's Rassilon, talking about how everyone on Earth has had bad dreams of terrible things that are to come. the dreams of fire and war and insanity. But these dreams are ones that are forgotten, like most dreams so commonly are. But there is but one person who remembers, and before I get any further, I already have praises for the story. Dalton's Rassilon being the one to deliver this speech works brilliantly for immediately setting the tone. His deep, dark, yet booming and raspy voice has such a natural way of delivering this chilling dialogue that it instantly sets the dark tone that the story has throughout. And with his voice being ambiguous until the end of part 1, it immediately creates an intrigue for the audience of who this voice is, and how and why he knows so much. And how and why he knows all of this as if he's witnessing it from the outside, which creates a sense of unease for the story right off the bat by having us know that the events we're watching unfold are being watched by someone. And even the shot of the moon was a good way to visually represent that there are some higher beings at play in the story. Because so many of the key significant stories in this era of Doctor Who start off with this shot, first used all the way back in Rose, and it's almost always accompanied by this music which sparks a sense of a hopeful adventure and a bright future, followed by usually a funny scene.
Inside the TARDIS.
What?
The TARDIS.
What?
The TARDIS!
The what?
It's called the TARDIS.
That's not even a proper word!
It's flipped on its head here, where not only is the music more dark and less hopeful, but it starts off from the moon, foreshadowing the eventual return of Gallifrey, which hurtles towards the Earth in a similar fashion in which the perspective does in this scene here. It's a little visual thing, but I think it adds a lot to the story right from the start. And even the music only becoming more hopeful and sounding like the Doctor's theme when the camera pans towards Wilf, a constant spark of hope in this story, even when facing the darkest and most dangerous threats in the universe, which also works because it cues to the audience in a subtle way that even in the darkest times, as Rassilon puts it,
the final day,
there is still always hope. Which, even as dark as this story can get at points, by the end, there is always hope for the future. This is something that Russell commonly does in his stories with dark concepts. One that comes to mind immediately is New Earth, which, while not being the best story ever, yeah, it hasn't aged amazingly well. But the concept for that story is exceptionally dark, with the cat nuns using essentially these flesh avatars of people as a basis to test and try out the cure to every disease in the universe. A human farm, essentially, which is a really cruel concept, which the episode explores the darkness of this idea really well at points.
Inside our head, they're so alone. They keep reaching out just to hold us all their lives, and they've never been touched.
But despite this, the Doctor manages to save them all and cure them all, leading to a very happy and hopeful moment in the future. And then, when we next return to New Earth, all of it has gone to crap because of this. And the few thousand people who are remaining, one of the only things that they have left is hope. It's what keeps them going despite at all time knowing they're basically facing certain death. A constant hope for the future is one of my favourite aspects of this show, as it's a brilliant message for people to follow, and even as bad as the episode was, Moffat got a brilliant line in Boom from this theme that the show so wholeheartedly carries at times.
I thought you didn't like faith much, Doctor.
Just because I don't like it, doesn't mean I don't need it.
And all of this is conveyed within the first minute of the story, with the music alone. As bland as he can be nowadays, it's undeniable that in his prime, Murray Gold was just as essential to making this show what it was, as were the brilliant writers and actors. Also prepare for extensive Murray Gold glazing in this video because my god, this is, with no exaggeration, his best scored story by far. He does an absolutely brilliant job throughout at accentuating the scenes, even stronger than they already stand on their own. However, right off the bat, an immediate criticism for this story is how the Master infected everyone's dreams. Nowhere in this part of the story or in part 2 does the episode actually address how he did this. While it makes sense for when he eventually goes off and uses the Immortality Gate for his face to be infecting everyone on Earth, since this piece of equipment heals entire planets, there is no reason or explanation given in that scene to imply that when he was doing this, that he sent a mental image of himself back in time to infect everyone's dreams with his demonic laughter. The only real inference I could come up with to make sense of this is that because the Oods say,
The Ood have gained this power to see through time, because time is bleeding.
maybe because time is weaker, the Master would have been able to do this. But even if that was the case, that should have been made explicitly clear by Russell when writing the story. And even then, that explanation doesn't really work, because all of this was happening before the Master even resurrected from the dead. The Archangel Network was also found out by the Doctor, Martha and Jack to have slight hypnosis abilities, so while it's never outright stated in universe, it's not out of the question to infer that either the Doctor or the Torchwood team would have taken them down, especially given the power that they can give off, given the right train of thought and power. Another possible inference would be something similar to this in the series 4 finale.
I kept hearing that noise. That heartbeat.
Oh, that was me. My single heart. Because I'm a complicated, then time and space must have rippled back, converging on you.
And even then, it was super contrived for this to happen in Journey's End, so even if it was also the case here, it doesn't excuse the bad writing. Yeah, this episode starts off great, but does also instantly show off some lazy writing as well, unfortunately. So Wilf goes into a church and we get some more excellent visual storytelling here, setting up one of the main themes for this story, which is focused more so in part 2, and that being honor. With Wilf placed right in the middle of a memorial wall showing the names of people who died for their country in the war, which obviously is a very honourable act. And the reason this works so well, despite Wilf being the most honourable character in the story, is because Wilf was a soldier in World War II, but he never actually killed anyone. And his gun from the war plays a huge part in some of the highest points in this story, with questions of morality and honour later hinted to in this part of the story, when Wilf is asked directly if he had killed anyone, which he denies.
I did not know, but don't say that like it's shameful.
And one of the reasons I think the military story beats for Wilf work so well in this episode is because they're actually the real life experiences of Bernard Cribbins that Russell had then wrote in for the character, which makes them hit a lot closer to home and all the more impactful throughout this story. But the theme of honour is more particularly in the second part, which we'll get to later, so I'll save it for now. As Wilf walks into the church, we're shown what appears to be a TARDIS in the stained glass, before this mysterious woman appears and talks about a time that the Doctor appeared here in the 1300s, and he saved this convent from a demon that had fell from the sky, before she ponders that he might be coming back before she mysteriously disappears. Again, this is such a great way to build tension and immersion in the story, by introducing another ambiguous figure into the narrative who knows more than she lets on, which naturally keeps the audience engaged for the story. And she also works perfectly throughout the narrative, because we never actually get a definitive answer on who she is, but that actually works in this story's favour. Unlike a lot of ambiguous storytelling in Doctor Who nowadays, the story doesn't rely on this character's mystery being solved for the narrative to be satisfying. So us not knowing directly who she is enhances the story throughout, but right from the get-go gives us enough clues as to who she might be. We can gather even from this early on in the narrative that she's someone relating to or familiar with the Doctor. And also more visual storytelling here is that whoever she is, we can tell that she must be dead. Not only given her ability to just disappear and only appear to Wilfred, but given her white angel-like clothes and the natural light that comes off her, particularly highlighted in dark scenes, shows this character in a light as if she's almost a heavenly figure of sorts. But they never overdo either of these effects to the point where it's too obvious or on the nose. Subtle visual storytelling is something that has been sorely missed in Doctor Who for a while now, and this episode has it in spades. It's brilliant. So we get some more fantastic tension-rising music as the woman disappears and the Master starts laughing before the title sequence rolls. So many praises for this story right off the bat, and we're only 3 minutes in. Brilliant setup for the story throughout, with 2 ambiguous figures keeping us interested, knowing that the GOAT is going to return, and knowing that Wilf will be accompanying the Doctor as well, along with plenty set up for the themes and some great visual storytelling and music as well. Oh, we already cooking! Before we get back to the episode, I think I should do a quick recap on where the Doctor last was before the events of this story. In the waters of Mars, we've finally seen the 10th Doctor reach his breaking point. The story and character arc of the Doctor built up through New Who up to this point had finally reached its peak. All of the mistakes he's made, all the people he's lost, all those vulnerabilities and insecurities shown to us throughout all of Tennant's series as the Doctor, and even shown with the 9th Doctor, come to fruition as the Doctor turns into the Time Lord victorious, breaking all of the rules of time for his own selfish gain. While the Doctor is saving the crew and changing a fixed point in time under the pretense that he's still saving multiple lives, so it's for the better, ultimately we know that this was an egomania-ridden power trip for the Doctor, which works for many, many reasons, particularly for this incarnation of the character, as we'd seen so many times his ego get the better of him, and he would make terrible mistakes that would almost cost him his life. But with no one to hold him back, which he so desperately needed...
Promise me one thing. Find someone.
I don't need anyone.
Yes, you do. Because sometimes I think you need someone to stop you.
People have travelled with me and I've lost them. Lost them all. Never again. They died. They all died. Do you know who that leads me? It's taken me all these years to realise the laws of time are mine, and they will obey me!
And considering the huge losses and grief he just suffered in the Series 4 finale, he completely snaps and goes against everything the character stands for his own selfish gain.
The whole of history could change. The future of the human race. No one should have that much power.
Tough. For a long time now, I thought I was just a survivor, but I'm not. I'm the winner. I've done this sort of thing before. In small ways, save some little people. But never someone as important as you. Oh, I'm good.
This is wrong, Doctor. I don't care who you are. The Time Lord victorious is wrong.
That's for me to decide.
You should have left us there. Is there nothing you can't do?
Not anymore.
But upon seeing this dark change in the character and knowing that the entirety of history could change, Captain Adelaide Brooke does one of the most defiant acts of saying fuck you and a willingness to stand up to the Doctor like not many others could. She kills herself to restore history, but with some details changed. And with this being one of the Doctor's biggest fuck-ups ever, he's then confronted by Ood Sigma, with him knowing this means his death is imminent.
I think your song must end soon.
Meaning?
Every song must end.
Yeah. Is this it? My death? Is it time?
And with his own mortality being one of the biggest fears of this Doctor, since he's been so desperate to find affectionate people and happiness throughout his tenure, trying to recapture that family life that this face was born into and he so tragically lost due to something that was ultimately his own fault, he does one of the most insane things for the Doctor as a character to do. Something that if it wasn't built up so effectively throughout his era, would be seen as out of character for the Doctor, since he's been established to be brave since the very beginning.
No.
He runs away from his fate. delaying the inevitable because he was scared to face death again. And while this is a very unlikable thing for the Doctor to do, because the 10th Doctor has so many layers and so much depth as a character, even as cowardice as this is, it's still understandable for him to do so. Considering that, death is something that we all fear, and also the Doctor's not long from coming back from the Time War definitely wouldn't have helped this fear either, especially since the 10th Doctor's life has been so short, yet filled with so much suffering and loss. Unlike future Doctors preceding David Tennant that would regularly act out of character and unlikable in some stories, purely for the sake of plot, despite the fact it wasn't built up through the era, so ultimately was just really shitty writing at parts. Because we've seen the vain, egotistical, and sometimes unlikable aspects of this character before, this was such an interesting note to leave the character on before his final story. And it's why the comedic subversion of the Doctor so nonchalantly exiting the TARDIS wearing sunglasses and a flower necklace works so effectively. And this talking over and distraction from tackling the point at hand is a really effective writing tactic that Russell employs all the time.
He had all sorts of jobs. He was so clever. Solar power. Mum said he was going to do this. Now he can.
Do you want to die?
Oh, this one's a little stuck.
Jack.
Agatha Christie. I'd love to meet Agatha Christie, but she's brilliant. Okay.
I want to stay.
Look at me. Donna, look at me.
Stop it. Stop it. It's mine, it's mine, it's mine, it's mine. Eat it, eat it, eat it, eat it, stop it. Eat it, eat it.
It's a subtle thing, but it enhances the drama tenfold, since it tells the audience that a huge part of this discussion or conversation will take a dark turn before we even know what it's going to be about. And this scene as a whole highlights a very interesting aspect about this story that's really brave to do in a Doctor's final outing. At many points in this story, the 10th Doctor is a fucking arsehole, and it is excellent. This scene shows his ego and god complex at its finest, with him so openly bragging about messing around and delaying time simply just because he can, joking about shagging Queen Elizabeth and just bunking off to have fun instead of facing the danger at hand. But deep down we know that this is just a coping mechanism because he's scared, a facade that is brought down minutes after this. A common thing with people with big egos or who act like they have big egos is that deep down, they're really scared and insecure, and that's something that the 10th Doctor so obviously is at points. Especially when we can see how angry he can get at the mere thought of not being able to save someone.
Doctor, let her go.
Highlighted the most in Series 3 where he's on the cusp of unlikability all the time, particularly in the first half of the series. But they never push it too far to the point where you don't want to watch him. There's just enough justification and background context to justify this behaviour that it's understandable for him to act this way, even if it can be unlikable. At the end of the day, he's still an alien. He may look and sound like one of us, but he isn't. He's hardwired very differently, and Russell played to this side of the character so expertly so many times in this era, and including here. Now, not to confuse people, and to make this as simple as possible, just because a character can be intentionally unlikable doesn't make them poorly written, as opposed to when someone is written to be very unlikable and it is out of character. It needs a lot of background citations for it to work, which is why it's such a hard balance to strike. Some examples of this to make it more clear. In Father's Day, the Doctor's reaction to Rose changing history is very strong, and he's extremely mean to her at first.
I did it again. I picked another stupid ape.
I should have known. It's not about showing you the universe. It never is. It's about the universe doing something for you.
I get it. For once, you're not the most important man in my life.
Let's see how you get on without me then. Give me the key. The TARDIS key. If I'm so insignificant, give it me back.
All right, then I will. Can't do anything right, can I?
Since you ask, no. So, don't touch the baby.
I'm not stupid.
You could have fooled me.
So it's okay when you go to other times and you save people's lives, but not when it's me saving my dad.
I know what I'm doing, you don't.
Is this an out-of-character reaction, despite it being unlikable? No, because as we've had slowly drip-fed to us through the series up to that point, the Doctor has only just recently ended the Time War and is very traumatized, and we see at the beginning of the series that at first, he doesn't want to make connections with anyone like he so easily would in Classic Who.
That's who I am. Now forget me, Rose Tyler. Go home. Look, if I did forget some kid called Mickey...
Yeah, it's not a kid.
because I'm busy trying to save the life of every stupid ape blundering about on top of this planet, all right?
All right?
Yes, it is!
But upon seeing and receiving kindness from Rose, he breaks down his tough exterior over time and is less harsh on people in general. You wouldn't see the Ninth Doctor do this by the end of the series.
Oh, Doctor! Oh, Doctor!
Help her.
I'll do anything.
Everything has its time and everything dies.
We see how his trust in people gets tested the episode before Father's Day as well, where he tries to let another person travel with him named Adam Bitchell. And Adam betrays his trust by trying to use the time travel for his own selfish gain.
Tell me? No, what do you mean?
The archive of Satellite 5. 1 second of that message could have changed the world. Keep out of trouble. Be average. Unseen. Good luck.
But I want to come with you.
I only take the best. I've got Rose.
So it's very understandable for in the very next episode, for Rose to betray his trust and ignore his warnings for her own selfish gain, that he would get so angry with her. Especially given that he trusted her, which is one of the only things that he has left at this point. And he grows from this behaviour and apologises for it.
Just... tell me you're sorry.
I am. I'm sorry.
Another non-Doctor Who example of how to write unlikable actions for characters without assassinating them is Captain America Civil War. By the end of the film, you can choose either side on who you disagree with, being either Cap or Tony, and you can see either one of their actions as being unlikable. But because there's enough background context for both, you can understand why they'd act this way. From Tony's point of view, he just found out that someone he trusted had lied to him for years and was protecting the man who killed his mother. And if you're familiar with Tony Stark as a character, you'd know that he held both his parents at a very high regard and loved them very much. So it's understandable that he'd get so angry as to start attacking Bucky and Steve, since Steve was protecting Bucky. And from Steve's point of view, we know that he'd protect Bucky because he knows that he isn't really like this because he was brainwashed at the time. And one of Steve's most defining characteristics is that he's loyal and noble, so naturally would want to protect his friend. Either of their actions in this scene could be seen as unlikable, but it isn't out of character for either, since it doesn't contradict their intrinsic values. Now, an example of this not working, since I think I've made this point clear enough, is the greatest Doctor Who finale of all time, Hellbent. A story which features the 12th Doctor acting irrationally out of character and unlikable for the sake of saving Clara. Which doesn't work because nowhere in the 12th Doctor's era is it built up or established that he would go against this character's intrinsic values for the sake of saving someone who's already been dead for half the lifetime of the universe, disrespecting her dying wishes.
I know what you're capable of. You don't be a warrior. Promise me. Be a doctor. I'm giving you an order. You will not insult my memory. There will be no revenge. I will die, and no one else here or anywhere will suffer.
I'll try not to break your jaw.
Jaw?
I wasn't talking to you. Doctor, you can't do this. You know you can't.
These people are unarmed.
So you...
Sidearm of the President's personal security. There isn't a stand setting.
I will not let Clara die.
Acting arrogant as fuck. And even if this was built up properly, because that story is such a clusterfuck of all things holy, it still never could have had anyone with common sense believably buy that the Doctor would kill the General in cold blood for no reason. The Doctor, simply put, would never be that selfish, especially since he spent 4.5 billion years grieving over Clara and acting as a defiant act to say fuck you to the Time Lords. And while the Doctor shows regret for these actions later, it doesn't distract from the fact that he would simply never do this, and does nothing to actually right his wrongs in this story. Being selfish, especially to this extent, is extremely out of character for the 12th Doctor.
You betrayed my trust, you betrayed our friendship, you betrayed everything that I've ever stood for. You let me down!
Then why are you helping me?
Why? Do you think I care for you so little that betraying me would make a difference?
Being egocentric, however, is an established characteristic for the 10th Doctor. 10th Doctor stands stay winning, he's still the best written Doctor.
I'm stronger, I'm smarter, I'm better. I am better! I'm not some weak-kneed fucking crybaby that goes around fucking apologizing all the time.
So just know that throughout this video, unlike usually when I'm reviewing Doctor Who, if I say the Doctor is being unlikable, it's because it's actually intended to be written this way. So it's a praise, not a criticism. Anyway, back to the episode itself now. After the Doctor braggadociously walks towards the Ood Sigma, we get the first sign that this cocky behaviour is simply a mask for his true emotions.
Anyway, what do you want?
Bit rude like. Before the Ood says that he shouldn't have delayed, and the Doctor follows him after a good joke about locking the TARDIS.
Better lock the TARDIS. See? Like a car. I locked it like a car. Like, it's funny.
Which works well because it's a good joke on its own, and it even further exemplifies that the Doctor has been travelling on his own for too long.
Blimey, I'm trying to make an Ood laugh.
Something that this character shouldn't do, which Russell has highlighted before in subtle and not so subtle ways. A story beat so good that despite this episode being 15 years old at this point, he still can't fucking let it go. Even the music plays into this whole scene so well, with the light and jovial parts of the track, A Frosty Ood, highlighted when the Doctor is being lackadaisical about the task at hand, only for it to go more serious and dark when the serious parts of the scene are played. So after a beautiful establishing shot of the Ood planet, we establish how something has gone wrong because of how advanced the Ood have become so quickly, before we find out that the Ood have also been having the bad dreams. Wait, so the Masters' infectious bad dreams are affecting everyone in the universe as well? Absolutely insane reach to accidentally imply. Like, I get that this story brings the threat of the end of the universe and the end of time itself and all, but considering they don't even explain how the Master or anyone managed to achieve this, that is an extremely stupid detail to write in. Even if the implication was that only the Ood can see him, they still have no in-universe reason as to why they'd be able to do so. So that sucks. Anyway, so we enter the cave with the Elder of the Ood, and this is another great setting that the show only uses briefly, but it's used to its advantage greatly in that time. The dark, low lighting with this council of Oods sitting in a circle looks mysterious as fuck, and keeps the audience engaged because of these cool visuals alone. As much of some of the RTD era can suffer and look dated because of how overlit it can be, it cannot be understated how much sauce some scenes, and especially this one, can have with the mixture of dark yet still bright enough lighting with some brilliant colour correction. One problem a lot of newer Doctor Who can suffer from, especially after Series 10, is the horrendous lighting at times. Even after the awful composition, cinematography, and colour correction nightmare of the Chibnall era, even now the show can suffer from having scenes and settings that are simply too dark to get any nice visuals from. And especially with it mostly being filmed on green screen, makes so many scenes just look so flat and boring. But back in the overlit days, you just get beautiful looking settings like this constantly, and they're great, even if some of the CGI doesn't hold up very well. So as the Doctor approaches, we get more fantastic, ambiguous foreshadowing dialogue.
It is returning, and he is returning, and they are returning, but too late. Too late. Far too late. He has come.
With retrospect, it's pretty obvious what this dialogue means, but I'd still argue that it works effectively at highlighting the events that are yet to come in the story. And it's here that we get to see the Doctor's playful facade broken down, as he becomes much more serious when he realizes that Ood will not brush off this light-hearted behaviour, and there is some serious threats at hand. It's subtle bits of nuance like this in performances that really make me miss when this Russell T Davies was in charge of Doctor Who, letting the actors do the work without having them outright say what they're doing is such an impactful way of telling a story, and Russell did this with his Doctors in particular so well. Like, not once in this story, or even in The Waters of Mars, is it ever outright stated that the Doctor fears his own death, and has been prolonging the inevitable because he's arrogant and scared. But it's the Doctor's actions and Tennant's performance that tells us all of this. It's absolutely superb. So the Ood's vision shows us and the Doctor that Wilf is so much more scared than anyone on Earth, and this is a great way of raising the already high stakes of the story by giving the Doctor, and there go the audience, a surrogate character to see these events through, and also give the Doctor a character he already has a pre-established connection with involved in the mix. Even ignoring the Doctor and Wilf's already established brilliant relationship and chemistry, Wilf is obviously also connected to Donna, which would naturally make the audience start to wonder about her safety and well-being as well, which naturally the Doctor then brings up, with the Ood not even answering and shunning the Doctor by saying that he shouldn't have delayed, which then also brings up an interesting point about this episode, and that's that everything that happens in this story is directly the Doctor's fault because he delayed the inevitable.
Not your fault. Isn't it?
If he wasn't such a coward and wasn't full of so much hubris, he could have gotten involved in the events of this episode sooner. So the Master wouldn't have gotten resurrected, the Neismiths wouldn't have enabled his evil plan, this evil plan then wouldn't have led to the Master bringing the Time Lords back, and Wilf wouldn't be in the situation he ends up in which kills the Doctor. So if the Doctor wasn't such an arrogant arsehole, this all could have been prevented and his life potentially could have been spared, which is an excellent usage of dramatic irony, especially since a lot of the 10th Doctor's shunned actions and moments that have caused him the most grief and trauma are all in favour of one of the most general rules of life, and that being that your actions have consequences! Not to go on another tangent, even though that is exactly what I'm about to do, this is something that we've seen throughout the entire first 4 series, tons of times, not even just with the Doctor, and is part of the reason why the Doctor's willingness to say fuck the rules of time in the Waters of Mars works as effectively as it does, as we see this take a toll on him more and more as time goes on. In Series 1 we see how the Doctor, quote, setting things right, unquote, in the long game sets up the events of the finale because he left a power vacuum for the Daleks to easily take advantage of.
We're just gonna go. I hate tidying up. Too many questions. You'll manage.
We'll have to stay and explain it. No one's gonna believe me.
Well, they might start believing a lot of things now. Human race should accelerate. All back to normal.
Planet Earth.
What's happened to it?
Well, it's always been like that ever since I was born. See that there? That's the Great Atlantic Smog Storm. It's been going 20 years.
So the population just sits there?
10,000 channels, all beaming down from here.
The human race. Brainless sheep. This should be the 4th great and bountiful human empire. I don't understand. Last time I was here, I put it right.
No, but that's when it first went wrong. 100 years ago, like you said.
But that was me. I did that.
There was nothing left in their place. No information. The whole planet just froze. 100 years of hell.
Oh my I made this world.
And this led to the deaths of hundreds if not thousands of people on Satellite 5, even before the Doctor arrived there. In Series 2 we see the rise of Torchwood, caused by the Doctor's own actions in Tooth and Claw, not taking very serious events seriously and using time travel ultimately just for fun, which isn't inherently an issue or flaw. There's so much more to it than that, but you can see how that style of life can bring so much negativity, even if it does save millions.
And henceforth, I banish you.
I'm sorry?
I have rewarded you, Sir Doctor. And now you're exiled from this empire and magic and think it fun. But your world is steeped in terror and blasphemy and death, and I will not allow it. I saw last night that Great Britain has enemies beyond imagination. I would call it Torchwood. And if this Doctor should return, then he should beware. Because Torchwood will be waiting.
And we've seen how much death and destruction Torchwood would cause, even ignoring the Battle of Canary Wharf.
For the next 48 hours, so when his body's pulled out of the docks next Tuesday night, he's only been missing for 3 days.
He was murdered.
Yeah.
And you covered it up.
It's my job.
Right, I can see the mistake. You think because we showed up at this scene of crime, we're out to catch the killer. Sorry, nothing to do with us.
And in Series 3, the rise of the Master was caused by the Doctor leaving a power vacuum in the UK government by taking down Harriet Jones because she attacked his ego in a way which, retrospectively, is pretty fair. I mean, her justification for doing her said actions is fair, not the actions themselves, because she was very clearly in the wrong for killing the Sycorax since they were leaving.
That was murder.
That was defense. I'm sorry, Doctor, but you're not here all the time. You come and go. It happened today. Mr. Llewellyn and the Major. They were murdered. They died right in front of me while you were sleeping. Those are the people I represent. I did it on their behalf.
And I should have stopped you.
What does that make you, Doctor? Another alien threat?
Don't challenge me, Harriet Jones.
And while he might have been able to undo the death and destruction caused in the Master's 1-year reign of terror, he still had the remaining last survivors of the human race at the end of the universe wiped out because of his interference.
What are they? Who are they?
Doctor, if I told you the truth, your hearts would break.
Oh, but they broke your heart, didn't they? Those Toclafane. Ever since you worked out what they really are.
Martha, tell us, what are they?
They're us. They're humans. The human race from the future.
Or probably the best example of all, coming from the fires of Pompeii, in which all of the events of the story actually aren't his fault, but he still has to make the hard choice anyway, leading for him to have to make the impossible decision of being solely responsible for the destruction of Pompeii or let the entire world burn, choosing the lesser of two evils, something that hits the Doctor on many vulnerable levels, especially since he wiped out the Time Lords and the Daleks because it was the lesser of two evils over letting the universe be destroyed.
Push this lever and it's over. 20,000 people. That's just it. Don't you see, Donna? Can't you understand? If I could go back and save them, then I would, but I can't. I can never go back. I can't. I just can't.
And sticking with Series 4, there's a brilliant scene in the shitty Journey's End which highlights that because of how the Doctor operates, he turns normal people into weapons.
How many more? Just think how many have died in your name. The Doctor, never looking back because he dare not, out of shame. This is my final victory, Doctor. I have shown you yourself.
A scene and character beat so good that Russell would shamelessly rip this from his own work 16 years later in Empire of Piss.
Because if you're dead, then I must represent life. Surely that's what I am. Life.
Disgustingly complex.
And even despite some of these major events not fully being his fault, and most of them not having any ill will or malice behind them, your actions still have consequences, regardless of what your intentions are, which is why this scene worked so effectively.
Imagine you found yourself somewhere, I don't know, Pompeii. Imagine you were in Pompeii and you tried to save them, but in doing so, you make it happen. Anything I do just makes it happen.
This era of Doctor Who is fucking cinema, and I won't be hearing any counter-arguments to the contrary, because they're probably all wrong! Back to the episode itself now. After establishing why having great world building and a connective narrative is so important, the next vision shown to the Doctor is of the Neismiths. I'll touch more on them after I go through the Master's resurrection, but for now, I'll say that they work for keeping the audience engaged since they're both a mystery at this point, but upon retrospect they don't really leave an impact in this scene, because the characters are so weak. But like I said before, I'll get to that soon enough. Probably like fucking 20 minutes from now, knowing me. So after we're shown Lucy Saxon in prison, we get a good flashback scene establishing her backstory and how the Master is going to come back, with the Master Vainglorious playing wonderfully over this scene, really exemplifying how everything that had happened in that story was so awful, and how it had traumatized everyone involved because of this tyrannical dictator's treatment and harassment of everyone around him. And this naturally raises the tension anyway, with the Doctor now knowing that arguably one of his greatest threats and enemies will be returning. Even further exemplified by Tennant's brilliant bit of acting here.
Part of him survived.
I have to go!
The way you can see his expression shift ever so slightly to one of pure fear as he realizes everything that this could mean. And with the Doctor's prophecy for him dying being based off one thing.
Oh, but then he will knock 4 times.
Someone told me just recently, they said I was gonna die. They said he will knock 4 times, and I think I know what that means, and it doesn't mean right here, right now. Because I don't hear anyone knocking, do you? 3 knocks is all you're getting.
We naturally assume that the Master will be the one to bring the Doctor's death, regardless of how the future events of the story go. But you know what they say about assuming? It makes a dick out of you and me. And this story plays on this reasonable assumption in the cruelest way possible later. But we'll get to that much later. And the scene only gets better and better with raising the intrigue, tension and investment in the story by having the Ood revealed that they've gained their new powers to see through time because time is bleeding. Not only is it the Master who's returning, he's in fact part of a greater design. The thought alone that the Master, the man who single-handedly outsmarted the Doctor and ruled the Earth for an entire year in such an effective way, slaughtering millions, and was only stopped because of his own hubris being too high and his views on humanity being so low that this character flaw could be taken advantage of, is merely part of a greater plan held by a higher power, is absolutely fascinating for this story to throw at us like this. Only made even better by the conclusion of the Ood's monologue being,
Darkness heralds only one thing: the end of time itself.
With the brilliant track, all in balance, playing us out to the next scene. Absolutely fucking peak! While this scene highlights an issue of style over substance in the narrative, with the Master able to project himself into the minds of every creature in the universe,
I think all the peoples of the universe dream of him now.
It cannot be understated how everything else in that scene was fantastic. The brilliant showcase of the 10th Doctor's arrogance, fear, god complex and trepidation, and it also boosted the intrigue in the narrative tenfold, along with the tension and stakes. Continues this era's brilliant track record of world building and gave us some fantastic dialogues and setting to bat. It was great. It even had some good jokes in it.
And let me tell you, her nickname is no longer... Anyway.
Now, can someone explain to me how Russell could balance all of this in 5 minutes yet can't deliver a single satisfactory theme in Series 14.
You're done. You're washed. It's over.
But he certainly wasn't washed yet. So let's focus on when this man was the unheralded king of Doctor Who. Despite Russell's used to be GOAT status for Doctor Who, this scene is the first showcase of a production issue that this whole story has, but it is so much more prevalent in part 1, and that being the reused shots put in place of what really should be new footage. I don't know what happened here, since this is an issue that was never present in any stories before this, and maybe this isn't too noticeable for casual viewers, but as the self-proclaimed biggest fan of this story, it's something that I picked up on even on my initial Doctor Who rewatch back in 2018. Maybe it's the film student coming out of me, but this undeniably lazy production value in the editing department is very distracting at points. Especially in scenes that are being very quick cut and intense by design. Because the shots don't linger for very long, them being repeated is only more obvious on rewatches of the story. It's not great. Speaking of not great, the next scene for me to analyse is the Master's resurrection. Something that basically this entire story is built upon, and is one of the biggest, most important foundations for this story to get right, since the Master plays such a crucial part in the narrative and the character drama and the themes. And how do they bring him back? Not very well, to say the least. Because this is such a big, hefty, and quite frankly messy scene, I'm gonna go through the scene with the positives only, then negatives only, just to highlight how much of a double-edged sword this whole thing is, because holy shit, there is a lot to unpack here. So the Doctor runs to the TARDIS and Lucy Saxon is released from her prison. And straight away I have to compliment this scene's introduction of the cult of Saxon. Considering we know how intelligent of a character the Master is, it's a great reaffirmation of this said intelligence that he would have set up a cult of people who worshipped him and would be able to bring him back in cause of his death. And for a character whose downfall was brought upon by his dismissal of humanity, it's excellent to show that he would go out of his way to brainwash a group of them in order to bring himself back with no concern for their own well-being. Something that is reiterated later when he says this.
Let them die. They're just the first.
It's a very in-line and in-character thing for the Master to do, and for this one specifically, shows off how smart the character is in a really effective way. In the introduction of this cult alone, recontextualizes some moments in the Series 3 finale in a really interesting way, which also bolster plot points in this story tenfold. Considering that the Master had let himself die, basically out of spite.
Dying in your arms, hope you know.
You're not dying, don't be stupid. It's only a bullet, just regenerate.
No, I guess you don't know me so well. I refuse.
Just regenerate, come on.
I'll spend the rest of my life imprisoned with you.
And to see if the drumming would stop?
Will it stop, Doctor? The drumming. Will it stop?
Rewatching this scene, knowing that he had a plan to avoid death, makes you look at it in a completely new light, and it's fascinating for that.
Now it ends, Doctor! Now it ends! If I can't have this world, Doctor, then neither can you. We should stand upon this earth together as it burns.
But over all these years, I've always had the greatest secret of them all. I know you. Explode those ships, you kill yourself. That's the one thing you could never do.
That little smirk at the end as well shows off that he clearly knew that even if he did die after this, that he would be able to come back and escape death once more. And it then leaves us with the open-ended question on whether the Master actually would have given in and destroyed himself had he not thought of this way out. And I do really like that. Regardless of how messy it is, this story actually goes out of its way to at least try and explain how the Master comes back. As opposed to classic Who, in which he would just die repeatedly very lazily being brought back without ever even attempting to explain why he didn't die.
All we ask that we be returned to our proper place in time and space.
So shall the one who is bound. His sins will find their punishment in due time.
Cancel the re-injection immediately. Doctor! I'll plague you to the end of time for this. Just show mercy to your own. What's wrong?
It's our speed. It's increasing.
Then reduce it!
You asinine cretin! What do you imagine I'm trying to do?
We're trapped, you blundering woman! Savored.
What's happening? I'm mortified.
What have you done? Induce an antiphase signal into the telemetry unit. The whole system should self-destruct.
If we fight like animals, we'll die like animals! If we fight like animals, we die!
Which was lazy then, and is still just as lazy now. The recontextualization of the scene also makes his death even more impactful than it was before. Because we know that in Series 3, the Master held a lot of spite and jealousy towards the Doctor for being the sole survivor of the Time War, and his general insanity and megalomania drove him to make such drastic decisions. But now knowing that he was so spiteful, so vitriolic, and wanted to say fuck you to the Doctor even more, that he would fully, rather pretends to die here, pretends that this is the end, over spending time with the Doctor. Wow! What an absolute dick! This is the type of depth to the Doctor and Master's relationship that many people may take for granted nowadays because of Missy, even though they're wrong. Because before this, we never really got much more than the Master is the Doctor, but bad. Now, it's not only an evil version of the Doctor, but his megalomania and need and desire to be important, to be able to rule and conquer, comes from a place of insecurity and vulnerability, and needing to one-up the Doctor because the Master was too afraid and ran away from the Time War. But the Doctor stayed, and the Doctor ended it, the seeming pacifist in the Master's life.
I saw it. I ran. I ran so far because I was so scared. How could Gallifrey be gone?
It burnt.
And the Time Lords?
Dead.
All of them? But not you, which must mean... What did it feel like, though? You must have been like God. Two almighty civilizations burning. Oh, tell me, how did that feel?
I need you to listen.
No. It's my turn. Revenge. Best served hot.
Then stop.
Once the Empire is established, and there's a new Gallifrey in the heavens, maybe then it stops.
Regenerate!
How about that? I win.
And this additional retroactive context from the end of time only makes this more interesting, especially when you take into consideration the Master's unwillingness to die before, despite the connotations, only makes his eventual sacrifice in this story all the more rewarding. It's fucking peak! We then get some double-edged world building, where the new governor says that Lucy Saxon's trial was held in secret with no jury, so no one remembers who Harold Saxon was, or where he came from, or why she killed him, before she makes her kneel. And I like that they establish here some of the aftermath that the Series 3 finale had on the UK, as that was something that wasn't really touched upon in the Series 3 finale, or in Series 4 that much. It's double-edged for a reason I'll discuss later. So after we get more brilliant setup dialogue,
It is returning, and he is returning, and
Tonight, Mrs. Saxon, he returns.
we get a brief scene with Wilf showing that the ambiguous woman is still looking out for him, before we cut back to the cult of Saxon making a potion to resurrect him. Also establishing here that the Master left books with knowledge on how to bring him back to life was great. Because not only does it further establish this character's wit and cunning, it also adds another layer of depth to his relationship with Lucy Saxon. So not only was he using her to mock the Doctor and flaunt around a human that he clearly never cared about in the first place, but he used and manipulated her in a way to bore his imprint in the likely case that his body was unrecoverable. It makes the Series 3 finale all the more interesting, and it's really intriguing to add yet another layer of depth to the Master's ruthlessness and intelligence, that he would think this far ahead and use someone in such a cruel way, with self-preservation being the only thing on his mind the whole time he used this poor woman. More people need to realize that the Sim Master is genuinely one of the most intelligent and competent villains in all of Doctor Who. He's fucking class. And as Murray Gold's brilliant score rises with the intense camera cuts and the sudden reintroduction to those ever so familiar drums, we get the moment that we've all been waiting for. The return of the Chicken Man.
Hello, and welcome to the Los Pollos Hermanos family. My name is Gustavo, but you can call me Gus. I am thrilled that you'll be joining our
team. And the Sim Master is just as encapsulating as ever, with John Sim's charisma and stage presence asserted instantly, with his insane ramblings and belittling tone.
Oh, Lucy. Sweet Lucy Saxon. Never, 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 never dying. Never dying. Never dying. Never dying.
And the first words out the Master's mouth being him shouting about never dying is also a great look into the character's psyche. Given that the way he died wasn't peaceful in the slightest, and he did it out of spite knowing that he'd come back eventually, knowing that while he was dying, the only thing on his mind was his own survival and thinking he can't die, simply refusing to do so no matter how many times he's killed, is fascinating. This character's reluctance to let go of life and clinging onto it at all costs is very similar to the Doctor in a way, but the reason they're both clinging on to life is so very different. The juxtaposition of the Doctor wanting to cling on to his life because he could do so much more, see so much more, love so much more, simply wanting to be happy for so much longer, contrasted to the Master who only wants to live so he can rule and terrorize others, to show off and feel important. It's spectacular, and again, also makes his willingness to sacrifice himself at the end of the story all the more rewarding. The Master's belittling and mocking tone towards Lucy as well, like I implied before, is a great way to show off this character's maniacal and evil nature, and further shows off his hatred towards humans. With him knowing that she would think he's long dead and cremated, and would never be able to return, and the way he's talking down to her here, you can tell he's boasting and showing off, even more, because this was clearly all in his plan. Even if his plan wasn't for Lucy to directly kill him, since he overlooked her so much, it adds that bit more of dramatic irony that she was still the cause of him coming back.
One thing you can't do. Stop them thinking. Tell me the human race is degenerate now.
Bring me back to life.
You're killing them!
Oh, let them die. They're just the first. The whole stupid, stinking human disgrace can fall into the pit.
It's very telling of the Master's character that he would brainwash or manipulate a group of people into giving their own lives towards bringing him back, but still wouldn't appreciate the sacrifice they're making for him, and would still clearly look down on humans. It's a different side of the Time Lords that Russell would explore very interestingly at rare times with the Doctor, but it's all the more interesting with the Master, given the character's different moralities. And given how much value we know the Master puts on his own life, it only reinforces further, I'm going to be saying that a lot, how immoral the character is that he would step on other species without a care in the world to ensure his own safety. And also shown that the Master still holds a grudge against humanity for standing up to him and playing such a major part in how he was defeated. And it's fantastic how in this scene we see the Master relishing in having the drums back in his head, reminiscent on all the death and destruction he's caused with them. Something so integral and defining in his life, a seeming symptom of his insanity that he's been forced to embrace over time. And this plays such a sharp contrast to how it's presented later in the episode, which is part of the reason that retroactively, this story makes the Master such a more interesting and compelling character as a whole. But I'll touch more on that later. But for now, even just playing these scenes side by side shows off why this was such an interesting way to present this as one of the Master's initial first reactions to the drums.
Can't you hear it, Lucy? Drum beat! Louder than ever before! The drums! Oh, I have missed them!
But it hurts. Doctor, the noise is in my head. 341, 341, 334. Stronger than ever before.
Even something that defines who you are as a person can be a detriment and can hurt you in the long run, even if you don't realize it at the time. It brings up the whole nature versus nurture discussion, which I'll touch more on when we get to part 2. This scene in particular, because, holy. So after that, Lucy Saxon then reveals that she did actually know the Master was going to come back, and she had people and contacts that could contact people smart enough to know how to stop the Master's resurrection. Right. So she throws the potion on the Master and he explodes mid-resurrection. And the Doctor arrives.
Far too late. He has come.
While I do like how this scene shows off the Master's dismissal of humanity is still one of his easiest flaws to take advantage of, as this is one of the only times he's directly outsmarted by a human. Or anyone really. But as you can now tell, now seems like the perfect time to go back through the scene and lay out its problems, because holy shit, some of them are more than gaping. To start off with, I think the most obvious issue with that scene is that despite all those praises I had, which I won't detract, don't get me wrong, because all of that stuff is still brilliant, but that entire scene was only 5 minutes long. And considering how poorly explained some of it is, it's really noticeable that this scene was rushed. You can't do something as major as resurrect the Master from the dead with fucking magic healing potions, and then not delve further into some of the details.
The devil's in the details.
Yeah, isn't it just?
And especially given some of the time wasting, or unnecessary, or pointless scenes that this part of the story has, it really does then beg the question as to why you would include some of those shit scenes over expanding this one to add in more details that this era is so well known for doing. And even ignoring the jarringly fast pace for a minute, some of the aspects of this scene just really don't work. Starting from the beginning, some eagle-eyed of you out there might have noticed this, but also during this scene, it is home to repeating footage in place of what should really be new footage. It's the last we see of it in this part of the story, but it's still distracting nonetheless. And also another production issue that the most eagle-eyed of you out there might have noticed is these black bars on the sides with the shots of the TARDIS. Now this I can at least somewhat understand, but it's still lazy production regardless. So as we know, the entirety of the RTD era was shot in standard definition until Planet of the Dead. Great first story to be in HD, by the way. But now we get the luxury of seeing David Tennant's spiky hair in wonderful HD. Now consistent viewers of the channel may not have noticed this, but because of its age and being made in this lower definition, if you watch back the era now, especially on newer TV, these tiny letterboxes are on the side. And the reason why viewers of the channel wouldn't have noticed this is because they're so small and they don't take up much of the shot, so I just zoom in to get rid of them. I also did the same with the 60th because seeing David Tennant and Catherine Tate in this forced letterbox cringe era of TV just doesn't sit right with me. But because a lot of these shots were made for the show when it was shot in standard definition, they never actually upscaled these shots to HD. And while this is a complete nitpick that only absolute nerds with no life would notice...
Wait, are you talking about me?
Considering they upscaled the title sequence, and even updated the TARDIS model to a HD one, I don't see why they couldn't do the same for these shots, even if they were only on screen briefly. And even taking into consideration that budget was most likely the issue, they could have at least cropped the shots or zoomed them in to get rid of these bars. It's the same with the Doctor Who logo going past the screen at the end credits as well, by the way. Even ignoring some of the bad production that scene shows off, it doesn't really work at explaining how the Master came back. While the additions like the Books of Saxon and the Potion of Life work at further adding to the Sim Master's already established intelligence, they never actually explain what's even in these potions or how they're made. Now sure, usually a detail like that is one that isn't really significant in the grand scheme of things, but this being used in the story by these people in this way is such an insane leap in logic that it's hard to ignore. While I don't doubt that the Time Lords would have conjured up potions to resurrect them from the dead, how the fuck has this group of random nobodies managed to get all of the necessary components to make this said potion? Be fucking for real. Even if they somehow manage to find everything they need to put in on Earth, which if we're being realistic, none of this stuff should be on Earth anyways, there's only two possible places where any of the stuff they'd probably need would be. And that would either be Unit, which I highly doubt they'd be able to get in because it's securely guarded and the most dangerous organization on the planet. And I also highly doubt that any of the Cult of Saxon work for Unit. Remember that Unit was still an intelligent organization at this point. And the only possible other place they could get this from would be Torchwood, which I doubt. Yeah, it ain't happening. So this episode's random introduction of voodoo to bring the Master back doesn't work because of the background context. Which is a shame, as I do think it's very believable and buyable that the Master could do this. But the explanation as to how is what brings it down. On top of that, with this scene being so brief and frankly too fast paced, it very much so comes off as an and then scene. What I mean by this is that it basically throws loads of ideas and interesting concepts at you at once without having the time to breathe and let these ideas sink in. And usually bad writing like this is done in a way to cover up the holes and stop the audience from asking questions, which it's most certainly trying to do here. But I ain't gonna let that shit slide. Like this scene, after already coming off the back of an actually very effective fast-paced scene, then adds on, so there's a Master cult that want to bring him back, and then they bring in Lucy Saxon to bring him back, and then they use a magic potion to bring him back, then the Master comes back, then Lucy Saxon actually had another magic potion that would kill the Master, and then she throws it on him, and then they all blow up. And all of that is thrown at us so quickly, it's like getting fucking sprayed. And in what believable possible reality do you expect me to believe, on top of the cult being able to make potions of life, that Lucy Saxon of all people would anticipate this and somehow, some way get others to make a potion of death, and then infiltrate the Cult of Saxon in disguise, and then also be willing to sacrifice themselves in order to stop the Master? What the fuck?
Was it fucking cool? Absolutely was fucking cool. Was it worth it? I'm not so sure.
This is beyond contrived. It is actually fucking insane the way in which they do all of this, and do it so quickly and just move on. And even going through the scene line by line, it starts to fall apart. The double-edged world building I was talking about before comes into play here.
So, no one knows who Harold Saxon was.
This cannot be true. Given that in the Series 3 finale, the Master had been on Earth for a year and a half, and had successfully become the Prime Minister of the UK, people should still know who he was.
You look like that bloke. Harold Saxon.
Hell, one of the main plot points of this story is kicked into motion because people recognised who he was. How and why would you possibly imply that no one knows who he was, you abstract watermelon? The Master had manipulated information to make a background for himself on Earth. Even if when the Archangel Network was shut down this history was erased, there's no reason that people would forget who they voted for the fucking Prime Minister.
He goes back years, he's famous, everyone knows the story. Wrote a novel, went into business, marriage, everything, he's got a whole life.
But you might be thinking to yourself that because the Doctor reverted history, only the main characters remember the events of the story because they were in the eye of the storm. Well, first of all, I'd say fuck you for implying that I could ever be wrong about anything. And secondly, the only things the Doctor undid was everything after the paradox was initiated. Because the paradox machine was destroyed, time reverted to everything that happened before it started working.
I'm taking control, Uncle Sam. Starting with you. Kill him.
Just saw the president assassinated.
Just after the president was killed, but just before the spheres arrived. Everything back to normal. Planet Earth restored.
Also, the Master killed the President of the United States of Hambonga. People will definitely remember who he is.
Oh, no one knows who Harold Saxon was. Where he came from. Why you killed him.
He killed the fucking president, lady! And really, all it takes for this resurrection to work is 2 potions, 1 remnant of the Master from when he was alive, and what must be the tiniest amount of splooge left on Lucy Saxon's lips is enough to activate this fucking life-sucking potion. Really? Does that not just feel super unearned and low-key kinda lazy? It's such an insane leap in logic that only these 2 things are even attempted as an explanation on how this brings him back. And the other biggest contrivance of this scene is Lucy Saxon's anti-alive potion.
But no one knew you better than I did. I knew you'd come back.
I simply do not believe you. I do not believe for a second that Lucy Saxon, a character whose introduction is used to cement the fact that she's not very smart.
But I've got plenty of research on you. Yes, good family, Rodine, not especially bright, but essentially harmless.
I was never that bright, but...
Would be smart enough and know the Master well enough that she could figure out that he's even capable of coming back. I highly doubt the Master shared his entire story on how he got there and survived the Time War and the history of his character, that she would know this. This does something that a lot of media does, and it uses the viewer's knowledge of events as the basis for the story instead of what the characters in the story should actually know. Like, yes, we all know that the Master would come back eventually, because we're familiar with the show, but Lucy Saxon shouldn't know this. And even looking at this from just a New Who and just a casual audience perspective, and we didn't know the Master would come back, it's very obvious that this scene is only written this way because it creates shock value. One thing that Russell's current run on Doctor Who proves to us is that he very much so likes wowing the audience, regardless of the context or implications. But one thing that this scene and a lot of Russell's new Doctor Who seems to forget is that a lot of the reason that his shocking moments in the show worked so well before is because they're well built up to and earned, and explained very well. None of which is in this scene. Why is there Empire of Death footage on my screen?
And I was never that bright, but my family had contacts. People who were clever enough to calculate the opposite.
Fucking who? Who in your family could know someone possibly smart enough to be able to calculate the opposite of a potion crafted by a fucking Time Lord? And how did you even contact your family? I know that people in prison are allowed phone calls and visitors, but considering the circumstances of Lucy Saxon's imprisonment, I highly doubt that she's been allowed any. And even if she is, considering the circumstances, those calls and visits should really be monitored. And how did the cult of Saxon get an intruder and not notice?
We have an intruder!
How did he get in? Intruder window?
How did Lucy Saxon convince this woman that Harold Saxon could resurrect from the dead with a potion of life, and that she needs to get a potion of death and also needs to be willing to die to stop him from coming back? What the fuck?
What the fuck, dude?
As many praises as this scene had, it cannot be understated how contrived, nonsensical, and rushed the whole thing is. So even despite its very noteworthy praises, I can't call this scene anything other than bad. The Master's character writing may be god tier, but it doesn't distract from the shit writing for literally almost everything else. And the entire foundations of the story are built on this. Everything that happens in the rest of this story, good or bad, mostly good, is undermined by the fact that the way the Master is brought back is really fucking stupid, not at all explained, and really fucking contrived. Such a shame.
You're Saxon's wife. You bore his imprint. That's all we needed. The final biometrical signature.
See, now that's some bullshit.
So the Doctor arrives far too late. This is a really good shot, by the way. And we cut to Joshua Neismith watching CCTV footage from the prison, which he has access to for some reason, with him and his daughter pondering on whether this survivor in the smoke is the Master or not. Remember when I said one of the main plot points of this episode is built on people remembering Harold Saxon? Yeah. Anyway, so as promised, now seems like the perfect time to mention the Neismiths, since they are actually pretty relevant to this part of the story, as they're the ones who enabled the Master to have a plan in the story, and have the plot device most crucial for this story as it leads to all of the best scenes in the story, with some of the best character drama that this show even has to offer. They all play a part in that, and, well, there's no beating around the bush that these characters suck. While they aren't offensively bad or anything, they're very much so just surface level bad rich people. Which really is a shame, since Russell could have used them for some sort of interesting commentary on class, or divide in class, or just anything, really. And considering how good Russell's political commentary was in the 2000s, it's extremely noticeable that he doesn't even attempt to give these two any discernible character traits to speak of. They're literally just two rich people. And that's boring. Especially when you consider that they are the ones that bring the Master to the Immortality Gate, which he then uses to become everyone on Earth, which he also then uses to bring back the Time Lords and Gallifrey. They are plot devices first and characters second. Extremely out of character for Russell to write in such a boring way. Or at least it was out of character back then. And this is only all the more noticeable later especially, because with the Vinvocchi, Russell actually writes another pair of characters that are mostly just used to bolster the plot, but at least he actually gave those two defining characteristics. They're entertaining to watch, and you do actually remember that they're even in the story, which cannot be said about the Neismiths. So we get shown the Immortality Gate for the first time and we get a very obvious trailer line.
Seems help is at hand. Christmas is cancelled.
And we then cut back to the most lovable old man to face the Earth with this track, Wilf's Wiggle, playing before he gets on a bus filled with old people. It's nice that the story gives us these nice moments of levity before returning to the usual dark, depressing world that this story creates. And this scene also naturally sets up a way in which Wilf and the Doctor can be reunited.
Phone around. Phone everybody. Sally, will you get onto the bridge club? Right, Winston, you try the old boys. Bobby, want you to ring the skiffle band, right? Between us, we got the city covered.
The silver cloak.
Yeah.
Silver cloak. It worked, because Wilf phoned Nettie, who phoned June. And her sister lives opposite Broadfield, and she saw the police box. And her neighbour saw this man heading east.
Considering how hard of a person the Doctor would be to find, having the entirety of the city covered is a great way for the two characters to naturally converge. How many people, older people specifically, do you know that knows a guy who knows a guy who knows a guy? I know that I certainly know a shit ton of people like that, and I don't doubt that you do too. This scene ends pretty decently as well, with the tone shifting back to a more serious one that the story is going for when Wilf is asked who the Doctor actually is. And he completely loses his smile and swears he can't tell them, but they need to find him as he'll be able to stop the bad dreams. And while the dreams are still without doubt a nonsense, unexplained plot point, they do work well here at playing into the drama and further boosting the feeling of foreboding that the story has used excellently so far. However, the definite highlight of this scene is how it shows Wilf's loyalty to the Doctor. We always got the sense from Wilf that he looked up to the Doctor because he was an otherworldly creature, but his newfound level of respect, love and appreciation for the character comes from how he made Donna the best version of herself. And I like that we see Wilf's appreciation towards the Doctor through how much admiration he has for him, and how loyal he is to him. It works brilliantly for this story and only further bolsters Wilf's character overall.
I'll watch out for you, sir.
You can't ever tell her.
No. But every night, when it gets dark and the stars come out, I'll look up. On her behalf, I'll look up at the sky and think of you.
Pretty decent scene overall. So we cut to two tramps in a wasteland buying scran from a food van, and this is when the episode really starts to pick up again. This scene already starts off in a praiseworthy way, with this shot of the two tramps behind this burning bit of wood, further creating a sense of foreboding of the fiery threat that is to come their way. Before, from a similar angle, a mysterious hooded figure appears. And one thing I'm going to touch on here is how this scene briefly has the characters talking about the recession.
The reference coming up to Barack Obama sorting out the recession.
Oh no.
Yeah.
While I do think it works well thematically for this story to mention the recession, since it was such a significant cause of depression in the world at the time, and this story obviously has its main character significantly depressed and the world becoming a harder place to live in, so it also bolsters that message as well. Along with the story also taking place not too long after Children of Earth, which is an incredibly depressing story. But I feel like they either shouldn't have included it at all, or if they were going to, then they should have taken it further. The reason I think it shouldn't have been included is because it unnecessarily dates the episode by unsubtly outright naming the problem in the world at the time, which Doctor Who usually only alludes to, even if it doesn't have an ounce of subtlety. But either way, if they were going to include it, they should at least do something with it, which they don't actually do anything with it. Besides these two being homeless, being loosely related to it, and they mention it for like a second later, Sean Temple mentioning it in Donna's house, and a man who very obviously isn't Obama appearing at the end of part 1, this story doesn't do anything with this potentially interesting theme and story beat. So it really does just make you wonder what the point of it was. Especially since it once again takes up screen time which could have been used to further expand and explain the Master's resurrection. If you ask me, the only reason any of this bullshit was included was just so that Russell could throw in these lines.
I'm president. President of the United States. Look at financial solution. Deleted.
Which, I mean, fair enough, these lines are really funny, but if you wanted this conclusion in the story, you should have built up to it in a much more natural way, instead of trampling on the toes of what potentially could have made the Master's resurrection scene 100 times better. Wasn't the episode meant to be getting good again? Oh, yeah. So the goat approaches and says he wants everything from the food van, and this scene is great. Similarly to the resurrection scene, I'm gonna go through this scene with the positives first, and then the negatives, because similarly to the resurrection scene, this is the part of the story that introduces the Master's electric chicken powers, which is a very divisive topic unsurprisingly. So I'll discuss the positives first and then the negatives. The way the Master is written in this scene highlights to me one of my favourite aspects of Russell's storytelling, particularly his early Doctor Who work. And that's how he manages to balance two conflicting tones at once, yet still deliver a satisfying and entertaining scene. This is an excellent writing quality that he still has to this day.
Because that's the astonishing thing about people from that planet. They can believe two completely different things at exactly the same time.
Where in this scene, The Master has you on the edge of your seat the entire time, wondering why he's become like this. Even more insane than he was before, but he's ravaging for food and anything he can get his hands on. What has the resurrection done to him? With John Sim playing up this unstable, deranged Master better than anyone gives him credit for. It's unfair to even mention this disease in the same breath. The insanity isn't just something he can pretend to mask anymore. He isn't just using his boisterousness as a playful facade to hide his true emotions. He really just can't even contain the creature he's becoming, and that is fascinating to see like this. Especially contrasted to how he still usually hides his emotions for the rest of the story. And the tension and intrigue is only raised even further when the lad called Ginger, I don't know why he's called that, says he looks like the Harold Saxon bloke who went mad. And instead of the usual for this Master, laughing when he's victorious, vainglorious, or when he's in a position of power and has outwitted an opponent, he starts mockingly laughing with him, which immediately sets the audience off that something dire is about to happen. Because of how we know the Master to be characterized already, we know that he wouldn't react along and treat a human in a way like this unless he didn't have some sort of scheme up his sleeves. Playing on the audience's expectations of what's going to happen is a brilliant way to write drama, and Russell used to be a king at this.
Is that bad? Okay, it's bad. How bad is it?
Ross Tyler, you're a genius! We can do it. Just gotta go and power up the game station. Hold on.
Doctor, what are you doing? Can I take my hand off? It's moving!
And then we discovered why. Why this doctor, who had fought with gods and demons, why he'd run away from us and hidden. He was being kind. Tricked my mother into the event horizon of a collapsing galaxy, to be imprisoned there forever. He trapped her inside a mirror. Every mirror. We wanted to live forever. So the doctor made sure that we did.
Molto bene.
Molto bene.
No, don't do that. Don't.
With the Master crashing out and laughing about how one of the main skills he has, being able to disguise himself in plain sight, has been completely diminished here, as he can't even trick two tramps into not knowing who he is. We can tell that his downfall has really gotten to him on a personal level, even despite him being a psychopath. It meant so much more to him than just ruling and conquering, since we know this character has a clear desire to be seen as important, and now that's gone as well. The last we'd seen the Master, he was at the top of his game, manipulating and outsmarting the opposition for 18 months, and then building himself up to be the most powerful man on the planet, basically turning the Earth into a warship, ready to take over the universe, and have ownership over everything and anything. Contrasted to the Master arguably at his lowest is a really interesting direction to take this character in. What can and will he become when he's lost everything, has nothing left to lose and is barely clinging on to life? And this story plays into this really well from an aesthetic standpoint as well. The Master's presentation in this story is fantastic. When we seen him before, he was clean shaven, had a clean trim, was armed at all times, and wore a nice presentable suit with these cool colours on the inside to make it stand out and look distinctive. Along with him standing by his beautiful blonde companion that he flaunted around. A design choice clearly inspired to mock the Doctor, even down to the suit. But now, the Master looks dishevelled. He's dirty and not clean shaven. He's wearing old tatty clothes that he clearly just found. And he has nothing. The juxtaposition of the Master going from the highest of highs to the lowest of lows is really, really intriguing for the character and the story, by showing us how the Master reacts in different circumstances, and how the different background contexts affect his actions. It's brilliant! With the Master showing his delve to insanity more, when his laughing tone turns into a mocking, belittling tone, and when he starts wiping this food wrapper on his face, worrying about such trivial things as the smell he gives off, and that his lack of anything is funny. The character's psyche on full display here, but also playing into why being able to balance two tones is important, is that even despite all of this brilliance, this excellent additions to the Master, he's still fucking hilarious in this scene.
I'm splitting my sides. I am hilarious. I am the funniest thing in the whole wide world.
Before it's revealed that the Master had eaten the people in the food van as well, going out of his way to skin them down to the bone, only to put the clothes back on their skeletal remains and stand them up just to fuck with these two random tramps. And I love that, honestly. As cheesy as it is, it still shows that the Master, at his core, is still a psychopath and a sociopath, and would go out of his way to fuck with two random people who he knows he's gonna kill anyway just for his own entertainment and a bit of fun. The fact that he's that sadistic and would do something that fucked up purely just because he can is a great way of showing off how far the Master has fell from grace. A perfect balance of scary and funny.
They can believe two completely different things at exactly the same time.
Before the Master kills the tramps, so the Master has powers now. I must admit.
That is a first.
However, I'm now going to set up a defense for these powers, as it's without doubt probably the most divisive thing about this episode, besides this, as people seem to either love it or hate it with no in-between, which I think is fair enough. However, as the self-proclaimed biggest fan of the Sim Master ever, I actually am somewhat in the middle about this. As you may have noticed, I said I'd do something similar here to how I covered the Resurrection scene, but really I just didn't talk about the Master's glowing Skeletor head and his newfound ability to jump super high and spit out lightning. And honestly, even being as objective as I possibly can, the Master's newfound powers are nowhere near as much of an issue as they're made out to be. Considering he was resurrected in a way that clearly harnessed the life energy from others, and that this resurrection was interrupted, it's not at all unreasonable to infer that the Master's body wasn't fully healed yet, and that it could explode out this energy, and that his form would break occasionally, and whenever he glows blue, is him dying further. Notice the blue skeleton and energy burst are the same colour as the energy that was resurrecting him. However, my issues with the Master's newfound powers actually come from his ability to jump really high, as no amount of interpretation or inference could possibly cover that up. What about the Master's body decaying and dying and exploding energy in real time would suddenly give him the ability to jump ridiculously high and not just destroy his body every time he lands? That is just silly, and the jumping takes me out of the moment every time without fail. And hell, while I don't mind the Sans cameo and the Emperor Palpatine cameo, I think a lot of problems caused by them come from the presentation in this part, which is really annoying for a reason that I'll explain in a second. I think these powers would be a lot more justified and easy for the audience to buy into if it was more visually apparent that every time the Master explodes out energy, or becomes a Minecraft skeleton, it is slowly killing him more. It's a small thing, but it would make this come off as a lot less ridiculous and way more believable and compelling, since we'd be on the edge of our seat the entire time, wondering if the Master can eventually solve this and if he'll survive, or if it'll eventually fully take over and kill him. There goes saving the Doctor's life, because at this point we're still under the belief that the Master will kill him. And the reason this is annoying is because this side of it is only really played into in the second part of the story. The only thing we get to convey this in this part of the story is this one line:
You're burning up your own life force!
Your resurrection went wrong. That energy, your body's ripped open. Now you're killing yourself.
And this energy bursting noise that comes out the Master. Which does work effectively, as it's a brilliant bit of sound design which shows us the Master's excruciating pain and the explosivity of this condition, and it also further shows how this drives the Master more batshit as this is a great way to visually represent his mind being corrupted and torn, but it just wasn't enough. They could have done so much more.
The gate wasn't enough. You're still dying.
This body was born out of death. All it can do is die.
In the best scene in Doctor Who history, the Master's powers play into it wonderfully, because you can tell that he is that driven, that angry, that fucking furious with his fate and what he's been forced to become, that he would give it all, throwing what little life he has left away because of this said rage. And part of the reason it works so effectively in that scene, and the reason it works so well in that scene, is because you can tell it's slowly killing him to do so, but he does it anyway because he's the fucking GOAT. And because of the Master's state in this story, being that of someone clinging onto life at all costs, it creates compelling drama since we know that at the lowest point this character has been in, he'd be willing to resort to basically cannibalism to stay alive, over just accepting his fate and moving on. But then he still gives it away in the best scene. So overall, the Master's powers are not that much of an issue. While his ability to jump super high is really dumb, everything else about this aspect of the story is fine. And most of it works brilliantly into the drama, and honestly, it is a really interesting direction to take the character. But it definitely could have been executed better. That's for sure. So we get this ridiculously hard shot of the Doctor standing over the Wasteland, signalling to the audience in a subtle way that even despite how low the character of the Doctor is currently, he still is on a higher plane than the Master is, and may still ultimately be his salvation, with the Doctor positioned high above all the rubbish and the filth, while the Master is directly in it, almost becoming it at this point, while the two sense each other out with this great music playing. And I like how we see the Master decide that ultimately at this time he just wants to fuck with the Doctor, play with his emotions before their inevitable reunion. Because at this point, the Master wouldn't want the Doctor for anything. Like I said before, he's at his lowest point with no plan and seemingly no way out of this predicament. Why would he want anything to do with the Doctor besides fucking with him? And why would he even want to listen to the Doctor since the Doctor would find him since he would want something? And of course, from the Doctor's point of view, the 4 knocks means the be-all end-all, and he starts running after the Master. Murray also cooks up an absolute storm during this chase scene. The Master screaming at the Doctor is also a great way of showing the current antagonism towards him, as the last thing the Doctor did was foil his plans, so why wouldn't the Master still be pissed at him? It's a great way of showing how deranged the Master has become, and showing his anger towards the Doctor without just spelling it out. The Master refusing to make amends and denying the Doctor their friendship back is an act that he keeps up for most of this story, and it paves the way for some magnificent scenes when this hard exterior is broken down and we see his true nature, that only the Doctor knows of. The jumping away is still really stupid though. I feel like even seeing him fall here would be more effective since it shows how little regard he has for his body right now since it's failing him. So the Doctor says the Master's life force is failing before the Master disappears. The chase scene was fine. The directing and music does a lot of the heavy work as both are on top form throughout, with some wonderful shots woven in here. And this unfortunately unreleased music is also fantastic. The absolute GOAT, King of Kings, greatest companion of all time, Wilfred then appears with the Silver Cloak. We get some nice dialogue between the Doctor and Wilf before an unfortunate joke of the times.
Is that your hand, Minnie?
Good boy.
That one didn't age quite so well. While that whole chase scene and Silver Cloak bit made sense for the story to do at this point, it really does then beg the question as to why not just cut out this chase scene and the moment of the Doctor getting sexually assaulted to extend the resurrection scene. Sure, we needed the Doctor and Wilf to converge naturally, but you could have done that without the 2.5 minute aura off and chase scene. Just have the Master kill the tramps, then cut to later in the day when the Doctor finds their charred remains, with the Master looming in the background waiting for the Doctor. Then, just have the moment of the Doctor trying to save the Master before Wilf arrives. Not only does that save a considerable amount of time that could have been used to make the resurrection scene better, but it also still conveys everything that the scene as it is already does, and adds more onto the Doctor's and Master's relationship, showing that they know each other that well, that the Master knew to wait here as the Doctor would investigate the murders that took place, showing that the Master also knows the Doctor just as well as the Doctor knows the Master. And while the Master waiting there just to run away may seem like a reach, I also wouldn't put it past the god of trolling to do this just to fuck with the Doctor. That seems in line if you ask me. The look on the Master's face before he jumped away clearly showed that he knew exactly what the Doctor was going to say in this situation, but my additional scene would have cemented that even further. Regardless of your thoughts on my suggestion, either way, it's better suited than a horrendously dated and unnecessary tonal whiplash scene of the Doctor's ass being grabbed. But I guess that was too much to ask for.
Fuck, I knew it was fucking too good to be true. Fuck.
So Wilf takes the Doctor to a cafe and we get what arguably could be the best scene of this part of the story. The scene starts off masterfully, with Wilf reminiscing about all the good times him and the Doctor had together, but the Doctor, very uncharacteristically to Wilf's point of view, doesn't reciprocate this behaviour and instead just stares at him blankly, with this really cold expression which is great. It immediately creates a sense of uncomfortability for the audience, as we all know all the shit the Doctor has been wrapped up in recently, and we know that he's really been through the ringer, so it's unsurprising that his usual happy persona, he can't even fake it anymore. His true emotions are dying to burst out and he's desperate for anyone to talk to and confide in, which he hasn't had for so long at this point. And we get a sense of all of this from the Doctor before he's even said anything, just because of the way he's looking at Wilf. And I do really like that the scene immediately creates this sense of uncomfortability, as like the talking over strategy that I was talking about before, it immediately tells us that this conversation is gonna end up with some very uncomfortable subjects being tackled, before we even directly know what they are. As Wilf brings up the Masters Infectious Dreams, we see the Doctor starts puzzling on why him and Wilf keep meeting. His life has become so wrapped up in prophecies and destiny and the Time Lord victorious, that he can't even accept the fact that it may just be a coincidence, leading him to act arrogant again.
What's so important about me?
Exactly, why you?
Don't you ever fucking say that to Wilf again! Nah, but seriously, this line is great for showing that all that stuff with the Doctor I said before, the fascinating showcase of the aftermath of the Time Lord victorious, it plays such a key part in the reason of why the Doctor is so compelling to watch in this story. And this is only exemplified further by this long moment of silence before the Doctor comes out with,
I'm going to die.
This line works perfectly for showing where the Doctor as a character is right now. Completely and unsubtly just saying that he's going to die, as we as an audience now realize that the only person he has left is Wilf. Someone who, despite having great chemistry with, he doesn't actually even know that well. He gives up pondering about all the bullshit he's had to deal with and just starts letting out his emotions that he's been bottling up so long. Letting out what's been on his mind and what's been eating him up for so long now, and it's great. And you can tell he says this almost in spite of himself, with the Doctor not long after this having forced himself to do one of the main things that this incarnation of the character is scared of, and that's fronting and facing his emotions. We've seen countless times throughout the 10th Doctor's era that he often shuts himself out emotionally, especially when faced with tragedy.
You alright?
I'm always alright.
But as we'll see throughout that scene, all of this has caught up with him. After so much trauma and loss, with all of that boiling over in the waters of Mars, we see the devastating aftermath of this when he breaks down more as the scene goes on, and it is sublime.
I'm going to die.
Well, so am I one day.
Don't you dare.
All right, I'll try not to.
Pain. Unimaginable agony. Seriously though, Bernard Cribbins plays his part in this scene to perfection, perfectly capturing Wilf's sympathy towards the Doctor, As someone who has also been to war and knows what it's like to face death, Wilf understands here how much stress this must cause the Doctor and how scared he is for his life to come to an end. Especially since he's all alone and has nobody, which Wilf obviously wouldn't know, which only makes it all the worse for the Doctor and all the more tragic when Wilf brings in Donna, but I'll get to that in a second. And I love how we see Wilf try and keep the conversation light, even in the face of the very broken and sad Doctor. It excellently encapsulates what I was talking about before about how Wilf always acts as the spark of hope in this story. Even when facing the very dark subject matter of death, he tries to lighten the mood and make the Doctor feel better, and that's great. As the Doctor tells Wilf about the prophecy for his death, we can see the Doctor slowly breaking down more and more with each passing word, and Tennant performs this to truly admirable heights.
But I was told.
The little bit of shakiness in the Doctor's voice here shows off in a superb way how much this is getting to the Doctor. After going through so much, losing so much, suffering so much, but still trying his best to give it his all and be the best person he can be. But regardless of that, he still has to die, and rightfully so. He's extremely upset about this. And it's not at all out of character for the Doctor to feel spiteful about this, considering the circumstances, which is why this line works so effectively.
Even if I change, it feels like dying. Everything I am dies. Some new man goes sauntering away. And I'm dead.
This, without a shadow of a doubt, is the most interesting way that regeneration has ever been presented. Regeneration in Doctor Who has often been treated like a death, but never before have we seen how this affects the Doctor on a personal level. The process of your entire body changing and dying, every cell in your body changing, your entire personality besides a few intrinsic values, is completely different to how you've lived your life so far, and that can't be a fun process to deal with.
Did it hurt? I mean, the regeneration. That last body of yours. Was he okay in the end?
It always hurts, and
And it's very understandable that after only living in this body for 5 years, yet suffering and losing so much, that you'd be so distraught about this, almost to the point of being spiteful it has to happen. For the Doctor who was born at the height of his life, happy with the Tyler family and slowly falling in love with Rose, only to lose all of that and repeatedly never be able to find that happy dynamic again. And the one time he does, he has to throw it away. And he also then had to watch the woman he fell in love with get her happy ending with someone who looks exactly like him.
I don't age. I regenerate. But humans decay. You wither and you die. Imagine watching that happen to someone that
You can spend the rest of your life with me, but I can't spend the rest of mine with you. I have to live on. Alone.
I'm old enough to know that a longer life isn't always a better one. In the end, you just get tired. Tired of the struggle. Tired of losing everyone that matters to you. Tired of watching everything turn to dust. If you live long enough, Lazarus, the only certainty left is that you'll end up alone.
It's very understandable that after all this time, he would become bitter towards the end, because he's just tired of the suffering. No one would want to be confronted with death, and the completely different circumstances to all the regenerations before this certainly wouldn't have helped this feeling. The Doctor has never had his own death telegraphed to him before. If you're trying to say War Games, it doesn't count because he didn't even have time to relish in the fact. He's essentially had to live with a precognition for the end of his own life before he has to continue on being someone else. Not wanting what he had before, and knowing that he had to live his whole life without ever recapturing this happiness, and it is heartbreaking. And I love that this story takes a new approach to regeneration by showing off that the Doctor isn't a perfect hero who's completely fearless. For the Doctor who struggled with his own mortality and the mortality of others the most, it's really intriguing to see how he treats regeneration way more like a death than he ever has before. It does truly scare him. He doesn't just accept his fate, and it causes him to act in ways that he otherwise wouldn't, and it's great. Even irregardless of Moffat's tampering and fucking up the Doctor's number and forever, the Doctor is naturally heading towards the end of his life, even if the prophecy doesn't fully kill him, as at this point he doesn't know if he'll even survive or not. He would be heading into his penultimate incarnation, and he's had to spend so much of this one constantly dealing with the struggles of mortality and grief, not long after wiping out his own people. It's safe to say this can't have been an ideal way to live his life, let alone end it on such a sad note, completely alone. Spilling all of this to someone who you don't even know that well, just because you have nothing else.
Look at us.
This is a much more realistic way to present regeneration considering these circumstances.
Even if I change, it feels like dying. Everything I am died. Some new man goes sauntering away. And I'm dead.
And this scene only gets all the more heartbreaking when it's revealed that the reason Wilf took the Doctor to this cafe specifically
What's so special about this place? We passed 15 cafes on the way.
was so that he could help Donna, with Wilf obviously not having a grasp of the dire circumstances of Donna's condition. And naturally his paternal nature would want him to see the best for his granddaughter, and he knows that the Doctor brought the best out of her. It's very understandable and human for him to do this, which only makes it all the more tragic as we know the Doctor can't help her, and we can see how much it's hurting him knowing that he can't. Especially since he was the one who essentially had to kill this version of Donna. All of her character development and growth, the confidence that she'd built up through the series, and the belief in herself that she'd gained, he had to kill it, and he's tragically confronted by this fact again, as she's here. Now, if only the Doctor knew that if he didn't have a cock between his legs, he'd have the emotional intelligence to realise that Donna could simply let it go. Seriously, like, I know that you all know that Russell's current run on Doctor Who is complete shite, but please consider that I am fast approaching 2 hours into this long video, glazing one story, but then I have to also remember the fact that the man who wrote this story in current day just goes on to write embarrassment after embarrassment. I tried to hold back the digs for this video, but you've got to understand these are very justified. At the time of this part of the video being written, I'm already a month into this video and I'm not even close to done. And I have the lingering threat of Series 15 floating over me constantly. Let's just hope that Russell finds his footing again for that. Russell not being a god anymore aside, Donna's usage in this scene is great. The excellent shakiness Tennant manages to bring to his voice shines again here when he says,
Just go to her now, go on, just run across the street, go up and say hello.
If she ever remembers me, her mind will burn and she will die.
Showing the Doctor still fiercely trying to hold back his emotions, leading to a strict, harsh delivery of this line. But it works in both ways, as it shows the Doctor's grief and rage in what he had to do to Donna, but also his unspoken heartbreak in knowing that he can never properly see her again. And I've gotta say, once again, it's nice to have little moments of levity in between scenes that are so dark and depressing in nature, with some great comedic lines sprinkled throughout.
Don't you touch this car!
Hold on, she's not going to be called Noble Temple. It sounds like a tourist spot.
No, it's Temple Noble.
Right.
And I love how we see in this scene that even despite the Doctor being arguably at his lowest mentally in this story, that at the forefront, it's his relationship with others that he still cares about more than anything. The Doctor as a character's intrinsic trait of kindness and compassion on full display when the Doctor asks Wilf about Shaun Temple, wondering if he's a nice man and if Donna is happy, which of course the Doctor would hope for, as, especially for this Doctor in particular, he puts so much value into his friendships and relationships with others, even more so after the mistakes he made and learned and grew from with Martha. Before the scene naturally returns to the depressing tone of the story when Wilf talks about their financial and living situation. Because even the Doctor's brief moments of happiness in this story can't last long as he's on the cusp of a breakdown, with Wilf then saying this.
And then sometimes I see this look on her face, like she's so sad.
But she can't remember why.
Which is a magnificently tragic line, as we know that Donna has to live the rest of her life knowing that she's lost something or someone, and she doesn't even know what. Similarly to a lot of people who suffer with depression, sometimes you can just feel down and in the dumps without even knowing why. But it's even worse in this scenario, because Wilf and Sylvia both know why, but they can't tell her. And it's really tragic. As much as I'm reviewing this story as is, without any future implications or references to future Doctor Who stories besides a few jokes, even in the absolute stinker that is the Star Beast, Russell shows why this is such a hard and sad thing for Donna to deal with. And honestly, Russell shows it off here way better than my words do it justice.
Sometimes I think there's something missing. Like I had something lovely, and it's gone. And I know I've got Rose and Sean and you. I should be really happy. I lie in bed thinking, what have I lost?
With this scene only getting all the more heartbreaking and tragic, somehow, after these lines.
She's making do.
Aren't we all?
With Wilf asking the Doctor about who he has, and the Doctor's breakdown at this point is just imminent. As we've seen throughout the Tennant specials, the Doctor has been completely reluctant to travel with anyone because of how much heartbreak they'd cause him.
Some figures I saw of the Doctor's life, you were never alone. All those bright and shining companions. But not anymore.
No. They leave. Because they should, or they find someone else. And some of them forget me. I suppose in the end, they break my heart. People have travelled with me and I've lost them. Lost them all. Never again.
And this mistake by the Doctor is completely at the forefront here, with him talking about how he thought travelling alone would be better. Logically, in the Doctor's brain, the thing that causes him the most suffering is the loss of others due to multiple different factors. So removing those factors from his life would naturally lead to him having a happier life, right? Ha ha ha, wrong. As we've seen from the start of this character arc, all the way back in 2005 with Rose, the Doctor is in desperate need of someone. After having been the sole survivor of the Time War, it left him a very vulnerable and damaged man, who's capable of becoming the man he once was in the Time War again, if not for the help of others and those around him.
It couldn't kill Van Staten, it couldn't kill me, it's changing. What about you, Doctor? What the hell are you changing into?
Coward. Any day.
But the Doctor has been in denial of this fact since facing heartbreak after losing the person who made him the better man he is today. But now, the Doctor has nothing and no one anymore. Unlike in Classic Who, when the Doctor travelled alone, it's completely different now because the option of going home is completely off the table. Because he killed his own home, and with the Time Lords inherently, ethically not being a good species, with tons of corruption and fucked morals, the Doctor should travel with someone. Because if he travels alone for too long, he'll fall back on the negative traits of his people that are so often shown with the Master. And especially with constantly having the thoughts and looming death of his entire race on his shoulders all the time, facing that alone would be a living nightmare.
I fought in a bigger war than you will ever know. I did worse things than you could ever imagine. And when I close my eyes, I hear more screams than anyone could ever be able to count.
And even despite Donna becoming one of the most important people in this Doctor's life, this was a lesson that he had to relearn after losing her.
I don't need anyone.
Yes, you do. Because sometimes I think you need someone to stop you.
You were right. Sometimes I need someone. Welcome aboard.
But I did some things that went wrong. I need...
And I love how in the scene we see the Doctor fronting his emotions and regret of what he did in the waters of Mars. Even despite the arrogance and the masking earlier in the story, The Doctor went against everything he stood for his own personal selfish gain, and this is killing him inside, which we see expertly here. Before the Doctor shuts himself out again before having a complete breakdown, once again suppressing his emotions because it's the easier option over facing the monster he had become due to his ego, not letting him admit the one thing he's been in denial of since he lost Rose. And that is the fact that he does need someone. The Doctor's morality isn't perfect, and the companions very much so bring him down a peg and make him act more reasonable, and are also his friends that make him a better person. And it goes without saying here, but I'm going to continue to do it 100,000 times more, but Tennant performs this scene to utter perfection. Truly god tier acting here as we see the Doctor visibly crack more and more, and he gets more upset throughout the scene until the culmination of him snapping back into closing himself off, and it is truly something different. Showing the Doctor's self-loathing here amazingly. This is the Doctor that carried the weight of the universe on his shoulders more than any other, and this has taken its toll on him. The refusal to accept that you can't save everyone, and letting that weigh down on his conscience is one of the 10th Doctor's biggest and most overt character flaws.
A Time Lord is so much more. A sum of knowledge, a code, a shared history, a shared suffering.
And it's gone now, all of it. Gone forever.
And we've seen this affect him so much more over time, and it's almost fully broke him. It's brilliant! And I love Wilf's reaction to all of this. As he looked up to the Doctor so much, it must be absolutely heartbreaking since he's never seen this vulnerable side of him before. The Doctor could still easily bottle up his emotions around Wilf before as well.
Still, that's fine. I'm fine.
So Wilf being so taken aback and upset by the Doctor like this is so good. And harken back again to Wilf being the positive spark of light in the story when he says,
Don't you see? You need her, Doctor. I mean, look, wouldn't she make you laugh again? Good old Donna.
Which is all the more heartbreaking as Wilf doesn't know the unintentional pain that he's caused the Doctor by making him see Donna again in such a depressing fashion. With the Doctor's sad, somber yet subtle nod telling us everything we need to know before he storms off and leaves Wilf behind. Holy shit, we are so back! After many questionable and some straight up bad decisions shown to us over the last 15 minutes of the story, this scene sets us right back on track, with so much character building and great narratives that you'd be convinced that we never even left in the first place. This scene works amazingly in every possible regard, showing us a fascinating new look into regeneration, which was never explored before this, with some great showcases of the 10th Doctor's character development and growth at the forefront, with him loathing himself and his mistakes, and finally admitting to himself that he does need someone, and it was fucking brilliant! With Wilf accompanying the scene amazingly, and naturally showing off why Donna was so important and special to the Doctor, and finally giving the Doctor the person he needs so that he could finally confide in someone and share his emotions was fantastic! On top of Murray Gould's amazing work shining throughout this scene, with the brilliant track The End Draws Near, complementing this scene perfectly, and highlighting the 10th Doctor's soon-to-be tragic fate, and his contempt towards himself, along with Euros Lyn doing an amazing job at enhancing the feeling throughout, with the camera subtly moving towards the Doctor and Wilf as the conversation gets more dark and depressing in nature, discussing death and the Doctor's mistakes, only for him to pull the camera back in moments of levity or downtime. Honestly, one of the best directors the show ever had. I'm not one for advocating for digging up the past, especially nowadays, but I honestly do hope that he returns to Doctor Who one day, as his ability to make this small budget sci-fi show feel like the biggest and most grand thing in the universe is a talent that he's remained thankless for. He's a king. Now, with all of that said and done, I'd like to quickly debunk the ridiculous claim that this scene was trying to bury the future of the show by showing the Doctor be so pessimistic about change and viewing regeneration as a death. Now, obviously, this is a ridiculously absurd criticism that's usually only cited by those with poor intentions, but I want to debunk it anyway. In the simplest way to put this possible, this criticism is just straight up bullshit and doesn't take into account any of the prior context or the fact that this is the 10th Doctor. If this was any other Doctor, I'd easily understand why them viewing regeneration as a death and being so pessimistic about it would be such a bad thing. Hell, they pulled this out of nowhere with the 12th Doctor, and it is almighty out of character for him to act that way, because there was absolutely no build up to it.
I don't want to change again. Never again! I can't keep on being somebody else. Doctor. Doctor. Let it go. Time enough.
But with the 10th Doctor, this has been built up from the very start. This Doctor's struggles with mortality and wanting to live like a human has been set up from even when before David Tennant was playing the character.
Who said you're not important? I've travelled to all sorts of places, done things you couldn't even imagine, but street corner, 2 a.m, getting a taxi home. I've never had a life like that.
We've seen him desperately try and seek happiness for 3 series straight, and every chance he's had has been squandered and crushed. It's very understandable that he'd be so pessimistic about dying and being reborn into someone else without any of these same desires or needs. And now he's sat here confronted with death, knowing he's nearing the end of his life, that he had to live the rest of his life without any of those said needs or desires. Also, to the people who say that regeneration was never treated like a death before,
why the fuck you lying? Why?
Please, don't die.
While there's life, there's...
Why you always lying?
Is this death?
Oh my god.
Also, let's just use some common sense here. I don't want to sound condescending, but like, come on. Why on earth would Russell want Doctor Who to fail? The man has been a Doctor Who fan quite literally his entire life. Even as pessimistic and dismissive of criticism as he can seem nowadays, and seeming like he doesn't care about the fans or whatever, it's not like he'd ever want the show to fail.
And this handover to the new team has been planned for at least 10 months, so it's all very civilised and lovely, and I can't wait, though, to actually sit at home and I will be a Doctor Who viewer again.
I mean, you've got all their, all their text numbers, and so you
even now
say, no, I don't like that.
Honestly, they're making plans now, and I sit there going, don't tell me, don't tell me.
Yeah, that criticism is just straight up piss and disingenuous. So let's move on. After that absolute masterclass in emotional storytelling, we get another ominous monologue from the ambiguous narrator. This crane shot of Wilf is the saddest thing ever, by the way. Visually representing to us this one small, ordinary, lovely man has been thrust into such a large-scale, universe-threatening adventure, and he's completely out of his depth. It's more subtle visual storytelling, but it works at reminding us of how this affects the quote-unquote little people on a personal level as well. The switch in music works wonderfully here as well. It's showing us where the characters are at in their headspace. We go from this downtrodden and tragic piece after the 10th Doctor's self-loathing to an undefeated, heavenly score as we see the Master in ruins, determined to cling on to life at all costs and get back what he wants so very much. The ability to rule and conquer and to be seen as important once more, contrasted to the Doctor standing above all the waste and the filth, desperate to prolong his life and potentially regain that happiness that he's been without for so long. The visual is also flipped on its head at the end of the scene as well, when the Master gets back on top and he's standing tall above the Doctor, who's left down in the filth alone.
All these years, you thought I was mad! King of the Wasteland!
which also harkens back to their stances in the Series 3 finale, as when the Master was on top, he could commonly be seen stood high above the Doctor, while the Doctor was lower down, usually in a weak position or completely helpless. And then by the end of the series, the Master is the one who ends up in that position, while the Doctor is powerless to stop him. It's great! And the dialogue from Rassilon helps bolster this notion as well.
A madman sat in his empire of dust and ashes, little knowing of the glory he would achieve.
This line works superbly in two ways in particular. Foreshadowing to us early that the Master will get out of this rut and will achieve glory, which could mean his massive victory by the end of the first part of the story, where he successfully uses all of his skills and best attributes to his advantage, and he manages to take over the world. But the other piece of foreshadowing that works amazingly is that the Master is the only one of the Time Lord characters to get a happy ending in this story, as he gets to find out why he is the way he is, and manages to enact revenge and salvage a friendship in the process. And this is only made all the more better with Murray's score here, subtly using similar motifs to the Cloud Pass, the track that plays when the Master enacts his revenge and gets his glory. Listen carefully to the music here. Subtle foreshadowing for the Master's redemption, while that notion seems like a complete impossibility in the narrative at this point, is a fantastic way to keep the audience engaged throughout. As while I doubt many people would pick this up on a first time viewing, I definitely didn't, it makes his redemption throughout all the more interesting, especially with the scene that's coming up which sets him on that track. And also another way in which Rassilon's line works here, yeah, sorry, I just thought of another one, is that, especially with the cold reveal of showing us who's been given these narrations so far, the most eagle-eyed and intelligent viewers could clock on from his clothes alone that he's a Time Lord. Maybe the Master's glory has something to do with that, which makes the audience think back to the line all the way at the start.
Returning, and he is returning, and they are returning.
The kids, what they say now, Paul? What they call what I do? They call this cinema.
As Rassilon's monologue continues, we get this brilliant pullback crane shot of the Doctor, while saying he's trying to change his inevitable fate. True. While the idiots and fools dreamt of a shining new future, a future doomed to never happen. A brilliant line on its own that only further expands upon the feeling of foreboding, and Dalton's threatening, chilling voice only exemplifies this even further. Because even when you know who he is, what he does, and why he does it, because Dalton's delivery is just so good, it only immerses you in the story even more because of the constant feeling of the impending sense of doom that he creates. And because it was set up earlier that we know the characters are being watched from the outside, or at least it seems like they're being watched from the outside. And we know because of the visuals that this is an almighty figure. And his reveal ends this monologue masterfully, before we harshly cut back to the Master, who senses his foe behind him. And I love the sound design when we cut back to the Master, because contrasted to Rassilon, who is very formal, noble and presentable, this scatterbrain sounding noise shows the sharp juxtaposition between the two characters, which hints onto us early of how their inevitable encounter would go. The shot then drags over from the Master's face to reveal the Doctor standing behind him. The long distance between the two also visually shows us the characters' divide currently, and it boosts the tension and immersion tenfold, since it makes us wonder what the Master is going to do to the Doctor, and what the Doctor's going to do to the Master, especially since we know how dangerous and unstable he is currently. But now the two are ready for their confrontation, with the Doctor being the first one to start it. But now, after the Master has had time to recollect himself and wallow in despair, he's also ready to confront the Doctor. He doesn't want to fuck with him anymore because he's now realized that ultimately he is the only person he can talk to any extent. Having lost everything and seemingly at this point not having the ability to rule or conquer over anyone, besides eating homeless people, he's now ready to talk, but not before showing off and trying to one-up the Doctor once more, as it's the only thing he can do at this point, even in the current state he's in. And we see this when the Doctor starts walking towards the Master. The Master purposefully fires off 2 shots next to the Doctor to try and warn him that he isn't going to get his way regardless of what he wants. Even though the Master will speak to him now, it has to be on his terms, with him being the one in the position of power. He hasn't forgiven him for ruining his plans and destroying his empire. And this is shown to us visually and without words. And I do like how they do that here, as this is how you do a style scene without having to sacrifice the substance. You can very easily do both if the text is strong enough, and Russell does it wonderfully here. Something that his predecessor really should have learned from him. Cool visuals don't have to sacrifice the cohesion of the narrative. Or just common sense, really. But another reason this works so well is that we see the Doctor purposefully ignore these warnings and showing off from the Master. Showing the Doctor's determination and bravery that he does multiple times in this story in a brilliant way. He's so driven to change the inevitable that he'll shrug off the Master exploding shit around him just so that he can get to him sooner. What a fucking unit. And they manage to convey so much to us here before they even say anything to each other. It's fantastic. As we see the Master rubbing his hands together, we can tell here that he's trying to intimidate the Doctor and tell him that if he gets any closer, he will hurt him. And as the Master starts striking the Doctor, I love that we see the Master strike him enough to hurt him, but not enough to kill him. Because if the Master really wanted the Doctor dead, he could have just done it there and then. But this shows that even despite the differences in morals and ethics and just a general outlook on life, that the Master does still care for and have enough respect for the Doctor that he wouldn't kill him. But he is still pissed off with him for what he did to him, which is really poignant considering how insane he is in this story. You could fully see the Master fuck up this notion, but at this time, he still has the will and brain power to go on his instincts, especially since he has nothing else going on right now. We get another fantastic showcase of this as well, with how the Master doesn't fully let the Doctor fall to the ground and collapse, showing that he does still care enough for him to not let him go through all of the pain of that strike, before the Master gives the Doctor an evil, dismissive look and lets him fall the rest of the way. The fact alone that he wouldn't fully let the Doctor take the full fall is great stuff on its own, but it's even better with the prior context as to why he would do this. His first line confirms this as well.
I had estates.
He wanted to hurt the Doctor because he ruined his empire, but he does still care for him even if these feelings are suppressed and are completely instinctual and subconscious. Showing off what a character's instincts are when faced with a sudden event is a great way to show off what their intrinsic values and mindset as a person are. And this scene shows this off for the Master expertly. Despite him being a power-hungry maniac, there is so much more to him than just what's on the surface. The Master then starts reminiscing about his and the Doctor's past on Gallifrey, telling the audience more about the beauty that Gallifrey used to be. And this only bolsters the narrative of the Time War and this story even more, considering the Master's beautiful description of
pastures of red grass, stretching far across the slopes of my perdition.
And the visuals we've seen of Gallifrey in the Series 3 finale, contrasted to how broken and in ruins it is when we see it in Part 2, with the planet itself looking like a fiery hellscape. Sharp contrast to how the Master reminisced it. Also more of Murray Goat being the goat here, is the subtle hints of the track, This is Gallifrey, while the Master discusses this. And it really is quite a depressing notion that from the Master's point of view, him and the Doctor used to look up out to the stars dreaming of what's out there and what they can do. Compared to how they are now, both of them have nothing, no one, and all they want to achieve is likely an impossibility, with the subtle Gallifrey motif stopping when the Master snaps us back to reality with,
Look at us now.
Time Lords, beings capable of so much more than we can even begin to possibly imagine, both sat in a wasteland, with both of their deaths being imminent. A truly tragic downfall for them both, only exemplified even further when the Doctor starts criticizing the Master for all the people he's killed, even in spite of his eloquence, and the Master starts to snap again. He doesn't even acknowledge what the Doctor says, and just talks about how he's hungry, which is honestly really sad to witness, as you can tell the Master can't even control himself here, rambling about all the stuff he has to eat, knowing it's the only thing that can sustain him, and John Sim performs this so well that you actually feel really bad for the Master, and it creates yet another fucking fantastic juxtaposition for this story compared to the Series 3 finale, where in that story, you have a very unlikable evil villain in the Master, going against the very likable uber charming hero in the Doctor, contrasted to this story, where we have an understandable yet still psychopath Master, but he's extremely sympathetic. Whereas the Doctor for the most part is an unlikable arsehole at many points in the story. The Master is a villain, but there's so much more to him that it's easy to feel sorry for him in this situation, especially seeing him break down like this. Contrasted with the Doctor, who we know as a character is intrinsically good, but he's fallen off the deep end. He's caved into all of his insecurities and vulnerabilities and can be very unlikable. He isn't just perfect, especially morality wise. It's such an interesting switch up to this dynamic which we'd never seen before this, and we've never seen it again since, and I doubt that we ever will. And even if we do, it'll never be done as well as it is here. The balance in this story of having the Doctor be likable and understanding in his behaviour, while also showing that he isn't a perfect person and can be a dick, is one of the reasons that I love this era of Doctor Who so much. And it's that these aren't surface level characters, they all feel like real people because of how many layers they have to them. The Master is not just an intrinsically bad person with no redeeming qualities. He's a very damaged, vulnerable, layered individual who puts up these walls because he thinks he has to. He's a megalomaniac who craves power and importance, but those said walls can be broken down and we can see his true nature. The Doctor isn't just an intrinsically good person who's capable of no wrong. There's so much more to him as a person, which is why even when he's being unlikable, you understand where he's coming from so you don't hate the character. It's exceptionally good character writing from Russell, and when you put these two together, it showcases Russell's ability to write real people just so magnificently well, especially with the switch up of the, at this point, 40-year-old dynamic between the Doctor and the Master. And I haven't even mentioned yet how this scene is yet another perfect example of Russell's writing tactic of having the character who's about to be confronted with something they don't want to talk about, completely talk over it. And here it works so well because we already know the Master is struggling because of his condition, so it really makes us wonder where this conversation could even go, especially for a character like the Master, who's so unwilling to show emotion or delve any deeper into what he is and who he is as a person. We'd seen in the Series 3 finale him run away from this constantly.
I just need you to listen.
No. It's my turn. Revenge!
What did you tell her?
I have one thing to say to you. You know what it is. Oh, no, you don't. Valiant now.
And you know what happens now.
No!
You wouldn't listen.
No!
Because you know what I'm going to say.
I forgive you.
But the best thing to come out of this scene is how it sets the Master on an existential crisis by the end, which I'll get to soon, don't you worry.
Stop it. It's mine, it's mine, it's mine, it's mine. Eat it, eat it, eat it, eat it, stop it. Eat it, eat it.
It's nigh impossible to not feel sorry for the Master here.
What if I ask you for help?
Besides this being the most irrationally funny reaction the Master could have possibly gave, I do like here that we see his unwillingness to work with the Doctor, as it makes the moments of connection between him and the Doctor so much more meaningful, since we know the Master is so hesitant to want to change, or even listen to the Doctor in this way, especially because of how much his mind is torn and corrupted this story. And it only makes his eventual teaming up and saving the Doctor's life all the better, because of the preconceived notions that we as an audience and the Master as a character have. Everything character-wise in this story is so meaningful and impactful, and it only gets better and better the more we get through the story, especially with what's coming up. As the Doctor tries to tell the Master about the prophecy, we see the Master ignore him due to his own personal biases.
Something is returning. Don't you ever listen?
Which is very understandable for the Master to do, especially in this condition, which is only reinforced further when the Master's entire viewpoint in life is changed. The drumming in the Master's head is so loud and so strong that it's not even a subconscious thing that's there for him anymore. It's almost reached the point that it's all he can hear. And like I mentioned when going through the resurrection scene before, it's really fascinating for the Master as a character to see it and have it be such a burden for him at this part of the story, considering how much we saw he was relishing in having them back before. It's an amazing switch up to now have them be a curse on his life. He doesn't have fun with it anymore. It's not something he can taunt people with because it's exclusive to him. It's now pounding so loud on his head that he's just in living agony. And you can tell all of this through John Simm's amazing performance, as even in moments of the Master trying to be his usual self, you always get a sense of how he's lost his mind and has almost fully gone insane. There's constant dark undertones to his actions, more so than usual, and it's great to see. This sympathy built up for the Master before plays into this really well as well, as when he's asking the Doctor if he can hear it, almost begging for him to hear it, every second of every waking moment, every beat of his heart, it's there, calling to him. This symptom of his insanity has changed who he is, redefined him throughout his life, and may have made him into what he is today after he fully became a Time Lord. And after this pleading with the Doctor, begging him to listen, the Doctor only reaffirming that it's just because he's insane. There is no noise, the Master is just a crazy person. But after the Master forces his head against the Doctor's with this excellent, almost growling-like tone from Sim, his entire perception of who he is and what he's become over time is completely brought into question.
What? I heard it.
The noise is real. All these years of the Master's life, he's been told he's insane. He's been told, and he probably assumed, that this drumming was just a symptom of his insanity and his villainy.
Tell me you can hear it, Doctor. Tell me. It's only you. Good.
Something that he's likely been mocked for his entire life. Something that has essentially ruined his life, as it brought him to this point since it made him the person he is, and is currently making him into more of a monster because of its effects. Something that if he'd ever told anyone it was something else, they would have shut him down and just said it's him. But it's not. It's something tangible, it's something real. The Master may not have been born evil, because this isn't a symptom. There's actually something inside his head that's made him this way. And naturally, at this massive revelation, the Master is pleased, but also naturally pissed.
What's inside your head? It's real. It's real. It's real!
John Sim absolutely nails this moment. The look of happiness, relief, yet still shocked and insane is, pun intended, masterfully done. It's amazing how the last time we seen the Master in this story, he was eating people alive and being an absolute menace villain, and he just attacked the Doctor, yet this scene still manages to create sympathy for the character. Because like I alluded to before, this also brings up the whole nature versus nurture debate, because it makes you think immediately on whether the Master actually is insane and evil by nature, or if it was this thing in his head that made him this way. And considering that we later find out that this was being forced upon him, it makes you feel bad for a human-eating genocidal psychopath. Not an easy thing to do, I can assure you. I'll touch more on this as we get to part 2, however, as it's much more integral and story relevant in that part of the story as opposed to this one.
It's real!
I'm just gonna pretend I didn't even see that. Why would you do this? He looks like Tony Stark. The contrast between the Doctor's and Master's reactions to this also further work at keeping the audience engaged and immersed, because of the Doctor's fear and the Master's relief. It makes us wonder about what the noise could possibly be, and how this new information will inform the Master's actions. What will he do when he knows he's not actually mad?
All these years, you thought I was mad!
Before the idiots and fools capture the Master. And I do quite like how he lets himself get captured here. Given this character's established intelligence, I don't think it's unreasonable to infer that he knew, since him and the Doctor were found by anyone, that they must be familiar with who he is. Or at least who one of them are. Well, more specifically the Master, since they go after him. And if they have a helicopter and soldiers at their disposal, that they're clearly people within a position of power that he can take advantage of. This notion is only reinforced by how we see the Master manipulate and act a fool around the Neismiths as well. Lovely stuff. As the Doctor is left, down in the waste, knocked out and alone, with nothing. Yeah, I wasn't kidding before when I said that we were back. Despite the Master's stupid electric chicken jump, that whole scene was absolutely fucking amazing. A great showcase of how to do substance over style while still delivering a cool moment and a satisfying scene, showcasing some great depth to the Master's character and redefining him even further by showing us these hints at his character development. While the Doctor didn't get too much to do here, this scene is an excellent showcase of the constantly changing, ever-grown and developing character that is the Sim Master. Showing off his dynamic and relationship with the Doctor in a really fascinating way that also has lots of great subtle storytelling. Creating sympathy for the character in spite of everything we've seen him do and know he's capable of, and further create intrigue within the narrative of what's inside his head. Along with the half reveal of who one of the ambiguous figures in the narrative are as well. We are cooking up a fucking 5-star gourmet meal which only gets better the more we go through it. And I cannot wait to share with you all how much more the story does later on, as it just gets better and better and better. So we cut back to Wilf and the Nobles on Christmas Day, as Wilf receives Joshua Neismith's book from Donna before we get some comedic gold from Donna and Sylvia.
Oh, love from Donna. Did you keep the receipt?
Yes, I did.
And I like how the scene shows us this little moment of Donna's subconscious being touched by the Dr. Donna. Not only is this a nice sentiment on its own, which naturally pushes the plot forward.
Maybe touching Donna's subconscious. Oh, she's still fighting for it even now. The Dr. Donna.
But it works as this little intense moment in the story, because the cheerful Christmas music stops and switches to this intense piece as we focus on Donna, only to snap back to reality with the Christmas music. Only to then snap back to the intense music again when we cut to the Neismiths. It's great work from Murray here. It makes this scene stand out a lot more than it would just on its own. This also nicely harkens back to what Wilf was saying in the cafe scene before.
And then sometimes I see this look on her face, like she's so sad, but she can't remember why.
And this also works well because of what we can already gather from the story itself. Again, future implications from Doctor Who aren't being used in this video unless they can be derived from the narrative of this era anyway. But the stinker Starbeast has another great line which works well at explaining this.
I had a subconscious infracutaneous retrofold memory loop, making me act as soft as you.
So we get this cool transition to the Neismiths and we see they have the Master tied up. And this little scene here is really good, as it shows off some character traits of the Master in a really effective way. I love that we see right from the get-go that he's playing his cards close to his chest, as when his mouth is untied, the only thing that he says is that he's hungry, which obviously works as it further shows the Master's need to consume any and all energy that he can, but it also is a nice little effective subversion to what we'd expect, which further reinforces the notion that he let himself get captured on purpose. Given that the Master sees humans as so beneath him and he has such prejudice towards them, we know that realistically, if they gotten up on him in any way, that he demands that he be released and that they obey him.
Which means they only work for me. Like this. Say sorry!
Sorry! Except he's not that old. But he's an alien with a much greater lifespan than you, stunted little apes.
And now, kneel.
Stop this right now. Stop it! I've had a whole year to tune myself into the psychic network and integrate with its matrices.
I order you to stop!
Because of him.
I saw them.
Go on. Do it.
And all this time your disciples have prepared. But so have we.
What are you doing? Don't you dare! I'm ordering you, Lucy! You will obey me! Because it's funny! Don't you see? Look at me!
So this scene works really well right from the start with the Master's first line, because we know that he's biding time and potentially has a trick up his sleeves, waiting to scout out the area and see what he can get his hands on before he tries anything drastic. It's great. I love how we see the Master relishing in vanity as the Neismiths discuss what he's here for. We can tell the Master really gets a kick out of knowing that his legacy on Earth is still intact despite its sudden end. The human race is that scared of him that he still demands respect and needs tied up so that they'll even speak to him. And they don't even know what went on in the year that he actually ruled. And his evil, mischievous smile as she says this is going to be wonderful further works at showing us that the Master clearly isn't just fucking around without a purpose, and is currently working on any and all plan that he can conjure up. And that's brilliant, because it exemplifies one of my favourite aspects about the Sim Master as a character, and that's his intelligence and resourcefulness. You can tell just by the look on his face and our preconceived notions of the character that he's constantly thinking of something he can do in this scenario, which he later does in an amazing way. The reason his plan was so impactful and effective in the Series 3 finale is because of how he managed to come up with this plan so quickly, despite being time-locked to Earth and having just regenerated. He clearly had the plan to harbour the end of the human race as an army from the start, but managing to implement this plan in the background of the show since the Christmas invasion and then get himself in a suitable position of power to execute this plan was fantastic and really showed off how smart the character is. And this scene sets up that he's going to do something equally as intelligent and resourceful right from the bat. And the Master doesn't even really say anything here. He just acts a fool and gives the audience an indication of what he'll do, but in a subtle way, unlike RTD 2.
Don't worry about me. Find that name.
Because I knew, Sutek. I knew.
Really? Wow.
Which also works as we can tell that he's manipulating these two until he can find something useful from them, which we've also gathered he knows they must have access to since they captured him. Real fucking cinema. As we cut back to the Nobles, we get another random pointless Recession mention before the ambiguous woman appears once again to talk to Wilf through the TV. She says that events are moving faster than anticipated, and it's established further that she can only be seen to Wilf, which cements that intrigue that's been built up for the character so far. We then get a further setup for the theme of honor in part 2, when she brings up that Wilf was a soldier in World War II, but he never killed anyone, which plays masterfully into this scene in part 2 in particular, with Wilf's honor brought into question when she says he never killed a man, because the time will come where he needs to take arms, which works at further creating intrigue within the narrative, as this would cause a confliction between the Doctor and Wilf, as the Doctor would never take a gun. Something the character is so adamantly against, almost too fuck, I knew I wouldn't be able to read that right. Vehemently. Almost too adamantly and vehemently against sometimes, given certain contexts. That was dog shit, but I think that's about as good as it's gonna get, to be honest. With the woman telling Wilf to tell the Doctor nothing of this, as his life could still be spared before she disappears again. This scene works well because it shows off Wilf's courage and loyalty to the Doctor, as despite his trepidation with this woman, as he doesn't even know who she is, and she still won't tell him despite his asking, he still listens to her and takes arms because it could potentially save the Doctor's life, which Wilf now knows the dire circumstances of, not knowing if he can survive at all or if he'll even live on to regenerate. The scene highlights every interesting aspect of the character that I talked about before, but only adds on to her mystery. Why can she only speak to Wilf? Why does she know so much about the Doctor? Does she want him to take the gun? So many questions arise with the perfect amount of ambiguity to keep her character interesting and still keep the narrative satisfying without these explanations. It's some good shit! So Wilf gets his gun from the war and the Doctor gets his attention from outside. I don't know how the Doctor knew that Wilf was upstairs in his room, specifically since there's no way he could have seen him through the curtains, but whatever. The two converge and the Doctor asks Wilf if he's seen anything suspicious happening lately, since Wilf is clearly involved but he can't work out to what capacity yet. As the Doctor questions Wilf, we get a nice moment showing Wilf's love for the Doctor, as he neglects to mention the mysterious woman as it could save him before he grabs the book that Donna bought for him.
His name's Joshua Neismith.
That's the man. I was shown him by the Ood.
The what?
By the Ood.
What's the Ood?
They're just Ood.
We then get our lovely confirmation from before that Donna's subconscious is being touched, and she's still helping in any way that she can before Sylvia comes out and we get more comedic gold.
What are you up to?
Get out of here. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas.
The 14th Doctor would never. And no, that is not a good thing.
Oh, Sylvia. So nice to see you again. Could you let me in?
You said if she sees you again, she'll die.
Well, no. If she remembers me, that's slightly different.
Oh, okay.
So Wilf and the Doctor go to the TARDIS in a comedic fashion as the Doctor starts heading towards the Neismith mansion, with some wonderfully funny lines and moments sprinkled throughout this scene.
Ah, right. Yes. Bigger on the inside.
Do you like it?
I thought it'd be cleaner.
Cleaner? I could take you back home right now.
Come back here, I said! Come back! Are you shouting at thin air?
Yes. Possibly. Yes.
And I do really love the detail that Wilf and Donna's first observations about the TARDIS, after already kind of knowing what it is to complain about trivial things instead of being impressed by the wonder that it is.
Here it is, the TARDIS. It's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside.
Oh, I know all that bit. Although, frankly, you could turn the heating up.
Do you like it?
I thought it'd be cleaner.
Cleaner?
Nice little attention to detail here, and it's pretty funny both times. I swear this is the last time you'll hear me say this when reviewing this part of the story. But again, it is nice to have moments of levity and comedy in the story, considering the large majority of it is so dark and depressing in nature. A deep character study with the plot of bringing the end of time itself is only complemented further with some of this era's classic comedic bits.
You can't come with me.
Oh, you're not leaving me with her.
Dad!
Fair enough.
So we cut back to the goat and the Neismiths, and this scene is fantastic. It introduces a pretty crucial plot hole, element, and we get more showcases of the Sim Master's brilliance. So as he walks in, we can see him clearly clock onto what this huge device is, and I love that he keeps up his facade of knowing less than he lets on, and continues to play his cards close to his chest as he sees it.
Oh, that's not from Earth.
Clearly hinting onto us early that a plan is starting to develop in his head, and he's thinking of any in which way he can use this device to his advantage. The Master's resourcefulness on full display here, as these two scientists go downstairs when Neismiths says the Master isn't from Earth. It is also really good that we get the attention to detail that the Master clearly clocked onto the fact that these two are in disguise and aren't human as well. Given that the Doctor can see through them clear as day, there's no reason as to why the Master wouldn't be able to do so as well. So that's a good detail. As they go to the basement, we find out that there are two aliens here to hijack the project and take the device once it's working. And before I move any further with this scene, I have to take a minute to talk about the absolute production nightmare that are the Vinvocchi. While I think the criticism that the introduction of these two is tension killing and their design is too ridiculous to take seriously, is a very disingenuous criticism. Like, seriously? Do you know what show you're watching?
I love that makeup, and I wanted to do a variation on that, and I just thought green would be funny, so we've ended up with relatives of the Zocchi, which are the Vinvocchi. But, you know, Doctor Who livens up when two spiky conkers walk through the door and start panicking.
Love 'em or hate 'em, he's spitting straight facts. The execution of this alien design is something that once you notice how they've done it, it's impossible to unsee, and it really just makes you wonder why. Now, if you've seen the Doctor Who Confidential for this episode, or honestly, even if you were just really eagle-eyed, I did low-key notice this before I'd seen the Confidential, you'd know that for whatever bizarre reason, when filming this episode, the Vinvocchi's face and half of their hands were still the actor's normal skin colour. But upon realising that this looked fucking stupid, they colour corrected their face and hands scene by scene, frame by frame in the episode. And when you notice, it's extremely hard to unnotice because, no offense, but they did a pretty shitty job throughout. Not only is the shade of green very inconsistent and can change within seconds depending on where the camera is, sometimes because it's dark they don't even bother to try and fix this error. But either way, once you notice this, you can't unnotice it, and it plagues every single scene that they're in. A few highlights of this because... oh dear. Bear in mind there's also probably way more than that I have simply missed. And the reason as to why they did this in the first place is so confusing, is because this is basically the exact same design as Banakafalata from Voyage of the Damned. But you can see from the production photos, and also just tell because he looks great in the episode, that the makeup on his face was all red. And they made the clever decision of covering his hands so they didn't have to worry about that either. The episode even acknowledges that they look similar.
Who are you, though? Because I met someone like you. He was brilliant, but he was little and red.
No, that's a Zocchi.
We're not Zocchi, we're Vinvocchi. Completely different.
And the gate.
I don't know who's at fault for this bizarre design choice and the later production issue that it caused, but it is very distracting to say the least. That being said, it doesn't actually affect the characters in any way. The design itself, if you can get past the production failure, is still good, and these characters, despite mostly being used for plot like I said earlier, are still perfectly serviceable and fun enough to watch on their own. There's enough personality in each of them to carry scenes, so it's not too distracting. So while this isn't really significant in the grand scheme of things, I just wanted to point it out because it's kind of funny. As Joshua Neismith talks to the Master, it's revealed to us how he got this technology in the first place, revealing that he got it from Torchwood, because when Torchwood fell, he acquired it. That doesn't make any fucking sense, yo. Either way you look at this line, it just doesn't add up. There is no way on planet Earth that he got this from Torchwood 3, because, well... yeah, that. And even if the implication of this is that he got this from Torchwood 1, how did he manage to do that? Torchwood 1 was shut down and found out after the Battle of Canary Wharf. I highly doubt that any and all equipment wasn't taken in by the Torchwood team in the Hub 3 and kept under lockdown.
We're separate from the government, outside the police, beyond the United Nations. Because if one power got hold of this stuff, they could use it for their own purposes.
We're nothing to do with Torchwood London. I severed all links.
Yeah, when it burned, 2 members of your team scavenged the ruins.
We don't want the equipment getting into the wrong hands.
And I highly doubt of what little equipment could have potentially been taken from there, that it wasn't damaged or destroyed beyond repair.
This is Torchwood 3. Torchwood 1 was London, destroyed in the battle.
The Immortality Gate, despite not working to full effect, is in way too good a condition for me to believe that he got it from there. And given that this is the only explanation as to where he got this from, there's nothing to call this other than a plot hole. While it is a plot device through and through, and pretty obviously, it's only made worse by the fact that the explanation as to how it even got here is just straight up bullshit. This so easily could have been fixed as well.
The gate was found inside a spaceship, buried at the foot of Mount Snowdon.
There. Done. Boom. Sorted. Literally just cut out the mention of Torchwood and it's fine. Evil millionaire with technology that he doesn't know enough about looking for power is one of the most tried and tested Doctor Who stories, and it has worked for decades, and it would have worked fine on its own here as well. The mention of Torchwood just makes this not make sense, to be honest. This is an extremely rare world-building blunder from Russell, which is really disappointing to see in my favourite story ever, since it's one of my many favourite aspects about this era of the show, and this is probably one of the only major faults in it. So despite this plot device playing into multiple of the best scenes in the story, it very unfortunately doesn't actually have a reason to be here. It just kind of is. Which sucks. After that little bit of stink, we get a scene which I find irrationally funny every time I see it.
But when Torchwood fell, let's just say, I acquired it.
I like you.
Thank you.
You taste great.
John Sims' delivery of this line, along with the music, really exemplifies how funny this moment is to me, to be honest. But even in spite of how funny this is, it works well at further showing the Master plays cards close to his chest and manipulating the Neismiths by playing dumb. Obviously, the Master actually is hungry and would probably devour this poor man in half a second, but it's great seeing that he knows that saying this will get him what he wants, since they'll clearly listen to his request since they want something from him, along with the Master downplaying his intelligence while he bides for time and thinks of a plan. Because realistically, this plot hole driven exposition from Neismith is for the audience. Obviously, the Master wouldn't really give a shit where this machine came from, or what they want it for, so this comedic yet effective line was perfectly placed. As the Master is given food, we get yet another showcase of Russell's ability to balance two conflicting tones at once, and still deliver a satisfying and effective scene, where we see the Master devour an entire chicken by himself, which obviously is very, very funny, and also works at creating shock value for the audience as we see how quickly he eats it. It makes our minds harken all the way back to when he ate the people in the food van and the homeless people. To imagine that he ate them in this way is an insanely fucked up thing to get into a Christmas special, but I'm all for it. We've seen him eating someone's bone before as well. There's actually also some deleted shots from this episode that I'm sure you've noticed I've used, which show the Master savagely ravishing what's on the remains of their clothes as well. Who would have thought that the most fascinating and intriguing performance of the Master ever features him skinning and eating people alive, on top of having a scene where he eats a whole chicken by himself. Absolutely unreal scenes here, to be honest. Like, the balance of actually giving the Master more depth, keeping up what he started in the Series 3 finale, on top of also having this be one of the funniest Doctor Who performances ever, while also still keeping up the character's scare and power factor, along with corrupting his mind to the point of being even more insane than he was before, but still showing off his intelligence and cunning wit, is honestly really, really impressive. This is an insanely hard balance to strike, which has never been struck since this story, and I doubt it ever will, to be honest. Any other time in New Who they tried to make the Master overtly funny, it has just destroyed their aura and believability as a good villain. But this story has it in strides, and I love it for that. Series 8 Missy struck a similar comedic but still threatening balance as well, but her next appearance immediately ruined that by playing up the comedy too much and removing the depth from her character. So the Sim Master remains the GOAT. I'm sorry, I don't make the rules, I just enforce them. So we get some more exposition explaining what the Immortality Gate does, and it's revealed that someone has to be in one side of the box at all times in order to monitor the radiation levels. Definitely a strange bit of design, but given that it's alien and is used as a medical device to make people better, I don't think it's unreasonable to infer that some of the Vinvocchi work in shifts to constantly monitor these levels. But even then, I mean, it works fine for the story and the narrative, but it is definitely one of those things that kind of just make you scratch your head. As in, like, why would you design it this way? Was there seriously no other alternative you could think of? It's slightly contrived, but not as much as the existence of this device even being here in the first place. So it's not a major fault or criticism, it's just a bit strange. It's very obvious why it was designed like this, because Russell obviously wanted the conclusion to be the Doctor survives this massive event and then goes on to save one little man. But back then especially, well, back then specifically, the man was very, very smart. I'm sure he could have thought of something better than this. And even though the scene that is built up to is amazing and genuinely some of the best Doctor Who content that's out there, most thought processes of trying to explain this away of why it would even be like this just falls into writing the story for the writer. Which I'm most certainly not going to do, and I'm just going to say that this was a bit daft. I'm not writing the story for the writer because I'm not a Moffat fan. So it's revealed to us that the gate can heal people, and it's being calculated that if the Master fixes it, it can make someone immortal, and this reveal of what it does works well in many ways. When Neismith first name drops the device, we see this brilliant shot of the Master, shown to us as an audience that he's now got a plan that we can see him running through his head. But this also doubly works, because if you take this as face value on a first time viewing, we naturally assume that the Master would use the gate to heal himself, so of course he would want to fix it. And it also works, because we as an audience know how desperate the Master is to cling on to life at all costs. So the thought process of making himself immortal is naturally the first thing that enters our mind. And also take into consideration that the only time the Master ever actually dies, he had a plan to bring himself back from the dead, which only makes the subversion of what he actually uses it for all the more impactful and hard-hitting. A utterly brilliant setup for one of my favourite and honestly one of the best cliffhangers in the show's history. As the TARDIS lands, we see some more brilliant acting from John Sim, as he shows us the Master running through and finally completing that said plan that we've seen him scheming about since the second he got here, and he manages to convey all of this with his eyes. With his eyes! This performance is next fucking level, you know. And he does all of this while also still playing up the facade that he's helping the Neismiths, as he still has his cards firmly against his chest. Some real king shit here, as all the pieces are now in motion for a perfect master plan reveal. You see, it's funny because it is a master plan, and he's also the master of plans and manipulation, and he's also the master. Yeah, you get it.
Sounds like it's sick.
It can't be. No, it can't be.
Doctor, what is it?
He's cannibalised the TARDIS.
Moved! We really moved!
You should stay here.
Not bloody likely.
And don't swear. Hold on. Just a second out of sync. Don't want the Master finding the TARDIS. That's the last thing we need.
Love the constant growing and learning from this character. It's been very hard to remember in recent memory that the Doctor is supposed to be smart. So I'll always appreciate the way that Russell wrote both of his good Doctors, as constantly learning and ever-growing intelligent characters over this.
What happens if you bring death to death? You bring life!
So the Doctor and Wilf sneak into the mansion while the Master works, and we get a strange bit of oversight in the script here. Try and look through my ugly mug as much as you can and really look at what happens here.
All the systems are slotting back into place. Shattered threads have harmonized, the fiber links densified, multiple overshots triplicated.
Nice game. Hello.
Did you catch it? I may be wrong here, but assuming I'm not, which is something I shouldn't do but I'm going to do anyway, Adams was still talking to the other one. I'm not even going to try say that name. While she walked away from the microphone, so surely when the Doctor and Wilf walk in and start talking to her, everyone upstairs can hear them as well, right? But then when the shimmer is shimmered, with a different face to before by the way, the other one acts as if he can't hear what she said and is surprised to see the Doctor and Wilf down there. Very stupid oversight in the script here, because it's not like she was just talking to herself. Most characters that don't have a brain the size of Jupiter don't talk out loud to themselves at work. Rare random L, but it's pretty insignificant overall considering how little time we actually spend down there. But this is still a pretty funny oversight.
Oh my lord, she's a cactus.
I love him. Nothing more to add, I just do. So the other one goes downstairs and the goat has everything in motion now. As Neismiths says Mr. Saxon can finish after Christmas, we get this brilliant shot of the Master, knowing he's about to achieve one of his biggest victories and most elaborate, resourceful plans ever, before the climactic reveal of him saying his name.
Please don't imagine I'm a slave driver. We can resume work on Boxing Day, Mr. Saxon.
My name is the Master.
As the Master suit starts blaring in our ears, we know that everything he's schemed has gone his way, and we don't even know what the plan is yet. But Sim's wonderful acting here shows us that the Master has exactly what he wants, and the tension is now through the roof. I love how we see when he's told he's being restrained, that we can see this little smirk on the Master's face, further shown to us the character's vainglorious nature, as even when they seemingly have an up on him, he barely reacts as he can barely contain his laughter, knowing what he's about to do, and at this point, the audience is on the edge of their seat.
So we'll be restrained.
What? But I repaired it.
You can hear in John Sim's delivery here that the Master is holding back his desire to show off and brag about this, but he's waiting for the perfect moment to execute the last step. Knowing that the Doctor is there and wanting to make sure that he gets to show off this massive victory to the Doctor especially, since what he does is so personal and targeted. On top of being a good batshit insane plan in and of itself, he's making sure to strike at the perfect time, as his manipulation has worked, all according to plan. The shot of the Master starting to smile as the camera moves closer only reaffirms this. It's a great bit of character work showing the Master's mania and megalomania really well. And part of the reason the Master is so smart in this scene, despite every bit of manipulation, playing his cards close to his chest and playing dumb, even on top of all of that, he uses his reputation as Harold Saxon to his advantage as well.
I have no doubt you've laid traps. Perhaps explosives. A means of escape. A murder. But everything you've done to the gate will be checked and double-checked before anyone stands inside.
So even in spite of him being tied up, he knows he can wait until the Doctor appears to execute the final part of his plan. Because of the reputation he has, everyone assumes that he laid traps, so he can buy time and bask in his glory for as long as he wants, really. Holy shit, this man is a fucking genius. As the Doctor tries to figure out what the gate is, we get some great comedic chops from Tennant before the reveal that the gate is a medical device that makes people better. But it actually heals entire planets at a time. Makes a bit more sense for it to have this double door design thing, but still, this reveal is great. Murray plays the parts of the Master suit to perfection here, really exemplifying the horror that is yet to come with the Master, as whatever he's about to do, is going to be colossal and planet-wide, which is insane to think about considering the Master's last plan.
We come backwards in time, all to build a brand new empire lasting 100 trillion years.
With me as their master.
And now he's going to do something that will affect everyone on Earth, with all the tension and suspense and immersion and horror and fear all going through the roof. The Doctor then runs to try and stop it. Absolutely unreal, unparalleled, unbridled
cinema.
We get another Master Vainglorious shot before we're shown the worst Obama standing in history with some doubly awful ADR.
I'd like to speak briefly about the state of our economy.
I stand by what I said before about why Obama is in this story in the first place, but it doesn't make it any less of a strange decision. However, one thing I will give this is that it uses one of this era's oldest tropes to its advantage. That being characters watching the TV and finding out about events through there. Watching the TV with your family was a way more common thing back in the day. Yeah, I know, it's a wild concept to imagine now. So having these events shown to us over the TV now does work well because it later shows the Master's effect on the world and how it has gone completely worldwide. So this is actually a really effective usage of this trope. Similar to all the 10th Doctor's finales now I think about it. But it works so much better here because of the significance of the people that we're showing. Which works at later implying that the Master has infected every world leader in every country in the world. Which he does. I still don't think we actually needed the Obama stand-in until this shot. But you know what? Every negative of this story has about 40 positives to make up for it. So we'll let it slide. Just a little bit, just this one time. So the Doctor barges in, demanding the Master not be let near the gate before the vainglorious goat mocks him and jumps in.
You do, just don't let him near that device! Oh, like that was ever gonna happen.
These little mocking, belittling lines from the Master are great, relishing in his glory and mocking the Doctor for looking down on him. Which isn't something that the character overtly does, but he definitely does do to a certain extent. Especially from the Master's point of view, with the Doctor constantly trying to help him and wanting him to change his ways. Which, as a psychopath and a sociopath, the Master would naturally perceive as an attack.
Homeless, was I? Destitute and dying? Well, look at me now!
As the Master stands in the gate, the story shows us a great way that the cliffhanger is built up to. And part of the reason it's so effective is that it shows us every character we've seen in the story that's from Earth up to this point being affected by the Master's laughing. With him inside their head being the only thing that they can see. And this hits especially close to home when Wilf enters the room.
Doctor! Doctor, there's his face.
Bernard Cribbin's delivery of this line is absolutely magnificent, really selling the audience on Wilf's fear of the unknown, and similarly to the goat, Cribbin's using some shakiness in the delivery really exemplifies the feeling of fear, which hits especially hard when it's happening to such a lovable, innocent character in which we've never seen this side to him before. Like I said before, Wilf is completely out of his depth in this story, but he's the only connection that the Doctor has left to Donna. So this one ordinary, lovely man has been thrust into this universe-threatening story, and that can't be an easy thing for him to deal with. But yet he still bears it because of the respect and love he has for the Doctor, and what he did for his granddaughter. Wilf is a very honourable man. Great moment here.
Can't turn it off! That's because I locked it, idiot. Hello? Oh.
It's great that the story goes out of its way to show us how this is affecting Donna as well, because we'd naturally assume that she wouldn't be affected because her mind has been altered. And we might think this is lucky at first, but really? Because of this, Donna has it worse than anyone on Earth, because she has to watch her loved ones be affected by this, while she remains out of the loop and unaffected, as per usual.
Great big spaceship, hovering over London. You didn't notice?
I had a bit of a hangover.
I had sidemen in Spain.
Scuba diving.
That big picture, Donna, you keep on missing it.
Donna's involvement in this does create one of the only issues in part 2, unfortunately, but I'll discuss that when we get to it. After Winston calls Wilf, we get more mocking Master vainglorious dialogue, before the grand reveal that the Master is going to become everyone on Earth, and holy shit, what a moment. The Master, 24 hours after being resurrected from the dead, with nothing, no weapons at his disposal, no ability to disguise himself, slowly dying and decaying, having to resort to basically cannibalism in order to even survive, and having his mind corrupted and torn, making him more insane than usual, has still managed to manipulate his way to the top by taking advantage of those around him, and has taken over the world and made an entire army of himself in less than 24 hours, man. This man is the greatest villain of all fucking time, and I'll be hearing no counter arguments to the contrary. This erasing sound effect that plays when the Master takes over everyone's bodies as well is great. All of humanity having its individuality removed from them, erased from existence while the Master takes their place, definitely can't be a comfortable thing to happen. And the reason this is such an effective and impactful plan is that it hits the Doctor on a personal level as well. The thing he loves the most about humanity, the individuality of people and the lives that they live, the lives that he has been so jealous that he can't live like, has been taken away from them by someone who sees humanity as nothing other than trash and beneath him. Everyone the Doctor has ever loved or cared about in any capacity is gone. Their mind and individuality from their own humanity is gone, and is replaced by a sadistic maniac mockingly laughing at him for tarnishing his human race. And I love that the Master makes this so personal. It's such a big fuck you to the Doctor that it creates so much compelling drama in the story, since the Master's death would bring humanity back, and the Master has basically just told the Doctor to fuck off, even though all he's done is try to help him and ask him for help. So it would be understandable for the Doctor to kill him, which is why the decision scene is so impactful, but I'll get to that much later.
Oh, but they broke your hearts, didn't they? Those Toclafane. Ever since you worked out what they really are. You see, I'm doing it for them. You should be grateful. After all, you love them so very, very much. With me as their master. Time Lord and humans combined. Haven't you always dreamt of that, Doctor? Human race. Greatest monsters of them all.
Tell me the human race is degenerate now. Well, they can do this.
You're killing them!
Oh, let them die. They're just the first. The whole stupid, stinking human disgrace can fall into the pit. The human race was always your favorite, Doctor. But now, there is no human race. There is only the Master Race.
And I love that while there's all this depth and nuance that make this such an effective and hard-hitting plan, there's no beating around the bush that this is sort of inherently ridiculous, which is why it's great that the Master still presents all of this in such a funny way. Given that a huge up that the Sim Master has on every other incarnation of the character is that he's actually funny, not laughing at him, but actually laughing with him, it's very in line and in character for this deranged psychopath to conjure up a plan that is so personal and affects the Doctor in a personal way, but still choose to present it in a way that is really funny.
Oh, I'm sorry, are you talking to me? Or to me? Or to me? Or to me?
As the Richie Reviews intro song plays us out of this episode, the track is called Final Days, and it works perfectly for raising the tension, immersion and stakes even higher than it already was because of its intensity, while playing over a montage of an entire planet of John Sims laughing at you for your awful takes and the fact that you are shit at Fortnite. Before we get a final brilliant bit of acting from Tennant, as we see the Doctor's expression go from one of shock and fear at the Master's actions to this look of anger and pure rage at what he's done, leaving us on an already top 5 cliffhanger of all time, before it somehow, some way, gets even better as we get the grand reveal after all of this time and all of this excellent build-up. We finally find out who the ambiguous narrator is.
This day was the day upon which the whole of creation would change forever. This was the day the Time Lords returned.
And fuck me, this is a great reveal. After all this time and all this build-up, starting to hint at this impossible narrative all the way back in 2005 with Rose, the Time Lords who were wiped out in the Time War will be returning. Who ever could have seen that coming? He has returned. They are about to return. So what is the it that's returning? We'll find out in the next part. And surely the Doctor can't survive all of this, right? The Master has control of Earth, and anyone who could potentially help him is also now the Master. The TARDIS is out of commission. The only other person on Earth he's aware of being able to help is another old man at the end of his life. And now the fucking Time Lords are returning. The track is even called Final Days. This is the 10th Doctor's final days. There's no way he could overcome all of this, right? We'll have to wait and see.
For victory! For victory! For the end of time itself! For the end of time itself!
Real fucking cinema! So, that was the end of Time Part 1, and holy shit, where do I even begin? This part of the story is brilliant! While this part of the story undoubtedly has a few problems which I'll discuss in a minute, they don't detract too much from how absolutely magnificent this part of the story is when it hits. Seriously, there's so many great aspects to this story's writing that it's hard to even know where to begin. I guess at the start? Where this story shows us a great and effective way to use ambiguous storytelling to its advantage, which it keeps up throughout this whole part. Dropping one of the reveals right at the end of this part of the story as well was fantastic, as there was enough hints and great dialogue sprinkled throughout that keeps the audience engaged and immersed in the narrative throughout. Because even when you already know the answers, this works so well on rewatches because of how brilliant the presentation of Rassilon is all through this part. All the setting up this story does is great throughout. The setup for the themes is great from the start, and they keep this up through the narrative with great subtle hints and moments that prelude to greater scenes in part 2 as well. Also, something I forgot to point out while going through, but I noticed while editing, is literally the first thing that Wilf says to the Doctor.
Have you told them who I am? You promised me. No, I just said you were a doctor, that's all. And might I say, sir, it is an honour to see you again.
The plot in this part of the story is fantastic as well, throwing us right in at the deep end right after the tragic ending of the Waters of Mars, showing us the consequences for the 10th Doctor's actions with him delaying the inevitable and putting all of these pieces into motion as well. With the Master being resurrected and let loose on Earth while the Doctor frantically tries to get his help before the Master is captured and then takes over Earth, leaving us on the edge of our seat for what will eventually happen as a payoff for all of the brilliant ideas set up in this part of the story, told to us in some of the most engaging and impactful ways that the show has ever seen, which only gets better in part 2. And the reason that this part of the story not showing us too much plot isn't an issue is because of the absolutely exceptional character work done throughout. Right from the start, we're interested in who Rassilon is and who this woman is, on top of Wilf being a perfect addition to the story, as he complements every scene he's in wonderfully, and Bernard Cribbins plays his part to perfection. Given the Doctor a man who is also nearing the end of his life was a brilliant idea that is executed to perfection, as Wilf is one of the only characters that the Doctor can relate to on multiple levels, since Wilf was also a soldier in a war who never killed a man, which the Doctor would naturally look up to as it's something that he deeply regrets doing, even though he was basically forced to do so, which works effectively as it sets up the dynamic further between the two, as they both have so much admiration for each other. And the Doctor and Wilf's pre-established connection and chemistry also bolsters this story a lot, since the history between the two, as brief as it is, plays into why their dynamic is so lovable and enjoyable to watch. Even more so because of the new direction that this story takes them in, especially since Wilf is doing nothing but looking out for others, i.e. the Doctor and Donna, while the Doctor is at his lowest point that we've ever seen the character on screen mentally, contrasted to the constant spark of hope that is Wilfred Mott. Every character beaten moment they play out of him in this story is perfect, and they only get better in part 2. And speaking of perfect, the 10th Doctor is also fucking excellent in this story, showing us the best worst aspects of his character in a really interesting way. How we see his god complex and ego on full display, while also showing us the character's compassion, trepidation, fear, struggles with mortality, regret, determination, bravery, and he still has many funny moments in the story as well. The fascinating aftermath of the Time Lord Victorious is explored wonderfully in this part of the story, on top of the fascinating and unique new approach that this story takes on regeneration. Show us one of the most interesting Doctor outings character-wise ever. And it only gets better in part 2. And I haven't yet even talked about the real GOAT in this part of the story. That is the Sim Master. While his eccentricities and insanity may have been turned up too much for some people's liking, it is undeniable that his character writing is utterly exceptional in this part of the story. Redefining this already redefining Master character even further by completely recontextualizing some of his already interesting actions in the Series 3 finale, by adding more depth onto his characterization, making his actions in that story a lot more compelling than they already were in their own, on top of further going on to retroactively make every incarnation of the Master before him more interesting, by opening up the question on whether he was actually born evil or not, his nature versus his nurture, and whether he became like this because of his inherent Time Lord nature, or if this was something that he was forced to become because he thought he had to, because of the drumming in his head, which then also turns out that it is something actually real, and it sets him on an existential crisis which is delved into wonderfully in part 2. And this story also shows off this character's intelligence in a brilliant way, showing him manipulate the Neismiths and fuck with them while playing his cards close to his chest and executing a master plan for all the ages. The most intelligent characterization of the Master to date, and it's not even close. On top of the excellent creative decision to put this character at his lowest point, while the Doctor is in a similar position, creates great conflict and connection scenes between the two, which only get more interesting in part 2. The decision to make the Master a Palpatine-spitting, moon-jumping, borderline cannibal mental case may not be to everyone's liking, but within the narrative of this story, it works to perfection, and John Sim plays his part in making this as effective as it is way more than anyone gives him credit for. This is a top 5 Doctor Who performance ever, and I can certainly tell you it's not number 5. And it was such a unique and interesting direction to take the character in, which wouldn't really work for any other incarnation of the character, which is why it feels so perfectly fitted for this Master and this era of the show. This era's inherent campiness plays into why this works so effectively, and it only gets even fucking better in part 2. Now, I'm sure you've noticed a lot throughout the praises for this part of the story that I keep mentioning how every aspect of the story is better in part 2. And that's because despite the many worthwhile praises that this part of the story has, which I will not detract, don't get me wrong, because I'm sure if these scenes didn't have as much depth as they do, I wouldn't manage to talk about them for 20 minutes each. It's also undeniable that a lot of this story needed a redraft, and certain aspects of the plot needed more fine-tuning. While the Master's resurrection scene works well at recontextualizing the Master's actions in Series 3, and further adding on to the character's established intelligence, and the way the Master himself is actually written in that scene is really well done, and sets up a brilliant subversion for the rest of the story, the way the Master is brought back really doesn't make any sense. Like I explained earlier, the scene was very obviously rushed, which brings it down a lot because all the seeds for a good resurrection scene are here, but they needed more time. And that brings up one of the main criticisms of this part of the story, and that is its bizarre near whiplash-like pacing at points. While it's great considering the circumstances and context for the narrative that the story throws us in at the deep end and starts very fast paced, it then takes a very sudden stop to show off the Master in a really effective way, which works well, but then we get a time-wasting chase scene with some unfortunately very dated humour before we slow down again for the brilliant cafe scene, only to pick up again, and then slow down again, and then pick up, and then slow down again. And it stays slower paced for the rest of the story, until the Doctor finds out what the Immortality Gate is. And while on their own, all of these individual scenes work perfectly fine, and most of them have exceptional character writing in them, you really have to question the existence of some of them, when more time should have been spent resurrecting the Master. Because starting off really fast and then slowing down, then remaining at a pretty normal pace for the rest of the part, doesn't work because we already were thrown in at the deep end. Having a fast-paced or slow-paced story isn't necessarily inherently an issue, and obviously you can play around with them within own narratives as much as you want, and you can make any sort of pacing work. But the way this part of the story handles it, in the hour that it runs for, just creates confusion. What I would do to fix this would be to cut down the chase scene to just a scene of the Doctor trying to help the Master before the Master runs away and the Doctor is then found by Wilf. We don't need the scene with his ass being grabbed because the Doctor would naturally want to talk to Wilf anyway, since he was showing him in the Ood's vision. They then go to the cafe, then Wilf gets the book, we then get the Wasteland scene, also just cut out the mentions of the Recession and the scenes of Obama besides maybe the shot on the TV. But even then you don't even really need that because you can just show the Master being president, but And then the rest of the episode plays out like normal from there on out. Which might not sound like too much a difference, but if it's cut down this way, we have an extra 3+ minutes to add on to explaining how the Master came back. Which would really help this episode's narrative a lot, since the entire foundations of the plot are built on this, since the Master plays such a crucial role in all the story's events. While I by no means am a writer, you could have just thrown in some lines like the Master saying that he stole the necessary ingredients to use in the potion from the TARDIS. And while the Doctor might have mocked at the idea of spreading 4 parts of something across the planet, I don't, and I hid these across Earth so that my disciples could find them and bring me back. Even a little line like that, obviously being written in a less expositional way, would help this tenfold. But naturally we also have the problem of Lucy Saxon's anti-alive potion. Well, how do we fix that? Well, considering we still have extra time to use, why don't we slow down the Ood's vision scene just a bit and add in some flashback scenes of Lucy Saxon overhearing the Master start to develop this plan in the events of the Series 3 finale. And then add on an additional scene of her relaying this plan to somebody in her family or a friend before she gets taken into custody and locked up. Remember, we have a year of the Master ruling over Earth, so adding in a retroactive flashback wouldn't seem like too much of a reach, and if you ask me, it would be very viable if the story had done this. Also considering that the Master did overlook Lucy Saxon so much. She could have heard him on the phone or something, discussing this plan while she's on the other side of the room, because he wouldn't even second guess that she could be smart enough to think of a way of combating this, and he probably wouldn't have even noticed she was in the room, to be honest. And instead of her anti-alive potion, because in no reality could that have worked, have her have this intruder person bring in a bomb for her to detonate the bowl full of the necessary components, and give her the chance to leave before she blows it up. This also removes the issue of the intruder being willing to kill herself in order to stop the Master. You could easily add in a line that she was a family friend or something, that obviously the Master wouldn't recognise because he didn't give a shit about Lucy. You could even add on another additional scene of her being caught in the blast of the explosion while she leaves, and the Doctor asks her if Harold Saxon survived, and she could go to answer him, before she passes away. Not only does that raise intrigue in the narrative and further immediately set the dark tone of the story, but it could also have added to the Doctor's guilt, since he directly caused her death and had to watch her die. And with slowing down the Ood's vision scene, and slowing down the Master's resurrection scene, since they both have more time, on top of showing this last get killed, it would slow the story's pace down more smoothly. Those mere fixes and suggestions alone would make the narrative of this part of the story flow so much more naturally, and it would fix the pacing issues that plague this part of the story. Because an issue that you might have picked up on by this episode's weird pacing is that the Doctor doesn't really get much to do in this part of the story. While he's fantastic in the opening of the story, and has that exceptional character redefining scene in the cafe, the rest of the story he's just kinda there, following the plot with occasional great hints to his characterization. Now this isn't as egregious as when it happens in newer Doctor Who, because the 10th Doctor is actually a well-written character, so there's always something to be captivated by him when he's on screen. But especially compared to the Master, where literally every second he's on screen there's something to talk about character-wise. After the cafe scene especially, I'm sure you noticed there wasn't many things I actually had to say about the Doctor in comparison. But it's not like he does anything bad. This is the best Doctor Who after all. But I feel like they could have maybe done more. I don't know. I'd also just remove the line where Neismiths says he got the gate from Torchwood, because being found on a buried alien spaceship was perfectly serviceable enough on its own. But even in spite of this episode's plot and pacing issues, naturally the first part of a finale is usually weaker than the second, because it has to set up all the necessary components for the second part to work. But even despite that, this part of the story on the whole is much better than people give it credit for, because of its absolutely exceptional character work. But the few major issues in this story are unfortunately significant enough that they bring down aspects of part 2 as well. But even in spite of all of that, I still love this part of the story to death. It's filled with so much exceptional character drama, brilliant storytelling at points, using many tropes of the era that make it the best in the show's history to its utmost advantage, and leading into the best conclusion for a New Who Doctor that we're likely ever going to get, and without doubt, a perfect ending to a near perfect character arc. If you can get past the occasional nitpick and little bit of stink, The End of Time Part 1 is fantastic, but it is absolutely very far from perfect. But it still bangs unbelievably hard. Weird pacing, nonsense dreams, a bad resurrection scene, boring rich people, a Torchwood plot hole and a few nitpicks can't detract from the majesty that this story is. Exceptional, show redefining character piece at its best, and a flawed but heartfelt story at its worst. The End of Time, Part 1, is magnificent. Let's just hope that Part 2 keeps up the good streak when we get to it. Right now, right now, we're going to review it now. Unless, of course, you're watching these as release and they're one by one. In that case, it is the waiting game, my friend. But thank you very much for watching.
I prefer the real.
Best regeneration story.
Doctor, I so need you.
Clara!
I prefer the real.
Best regeneration story.
Yeah. If you like, ladies made of glass.
Well, aren't all ladies made of glass in a way?
Very good, sir. I said the real.
Best regeneration story.
Even if I change, it feels like dying. Everything I am dies. Some new man goes sauntering away. And I'm dead.
Perfection.
Anyway, I started blasting. Bang! Bang!
Never.
Okay, now you have my attention.
This story starts off masterfully, with this brilliant shot in space starting from the moon, which suddenly... Fucking piece of shit. Motherfucking every time.